Once upon a time, in a cozy little house on the edge of a quiet town, something strange happened. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the family gathered in the living room, laughing and sharing stories. Suddenly, a loud, creaking sound echoed through the house. They turned to see a door standing in the corner where there had never been one before. It was old and wooden, with strange carvings that seemed to shift in the fading light. Curiosity bubbled up inside them, and they felt an irresistible urge to open it. As they stepped closer, a chill ran down their spines. What lay beyond that door? Was it a secret room, or something much more mysterious? The air around them felt thick with magic and danger. They exchanged nervous glances, but their curiosity won over their fear. They reached for the doorknob, and with a deep breath, they turned it. The door swung open, revealing a swirling mist that beckoned them into a dreamlike world filled with vibrant colors and strange sounds. They stepped through, and the moment they did, they felt a rush of excitement mixed with unease. Everything around them was beautiful, yet unsettling, as if they had entered a painting where the rules of reality no longer applied. But as they wandered deeper into this strange land, they began to notice something terrifying. For every minute they spent in this new world, hours passed in their home. Time slipped away like sand through their fingers, and the more they explored, the more they realized they might never return. The vibrant colors began to fade, replaced by shadows that whispered their fears. The laughter that once filled their hearts turned to silence, and they felt a growing sense of dread. As they tried to find their way back, the door seemed to shift further away, leading them deeper into the heart of the dreamlike realm. Strange creatures watched them from the shadows, their eyes gleaming with an unsettling light. The family felt as if they were being hunted, every moment stretching into eternity. They ran, but the landscape twisted and turned, disorienting them. Every time they thought they found a way out, they were met with more doors, each leading to even stranger and scarier places. The laughter of children echoed in the distance, but it was not the joyful sound they remembered. It was haunting, filled with sorrow and longing. They knew they had to escape, but the world around them seemed to conspire against them. With every passing moment, they felt the pull of their home growing weaker. They had to find the door again, but the landscape shifted like a dream, and they couldn't remember where they had come from. Panic set in as they realized they were losing themselves to this alternate reality. They had to make a choice: stay and explore the wonders of this world, or fight to return to their family and home. The clock in their minds ticked louder, a reminder that time was slipping away. They could feel the weight of lost hours pressing down on them, and the fear of being trapped forever loomed large. They had to be brave, to trust each other, and to find a way back before it was too late. As shadows danced around them, they gathered their courage. They would not let this strange world take them. They would find the door to nowhere and return to the warmth of their home, no matter the cost. And just as they thought they were lost forever, a glimmer of light appeared in the distance. It was faint but unmistakable, a sign that hope was not lost. They raced toward it, hearts pounding, ready to face whatever lay ahead. But the closer they got, the more they realized that the light was not what it seemed. It flickered and faded, revealing a figure cloaked in darkness. It smiled, but it was not a friendly smile. It was a grin filled with secrets and shadows, and it spoke in a voice that chilled them to the bone. "Welcome to my world," it said, as the ground beneath them began to shift. "You've come to play, haven't you?" The family felt a wave of terror wash over them. They were not just visitors in this dreamlike realm. They were now part of a game, and the stakes were higher than they could have ever imagined. With their hearts racing, they realized they had to outsmart this dark figure and find the door before it was too late. They had to work together, using their wits and courage to navigate the twisted paths of this strange world. As they ventured deeper, they encountered bizarre landscapes that twisted their sense of reality. Rivers flowed with colors that shouldn't exist, and trees whispered secrets that sent shivers down their spines. They saw reflections of themselves in the water, but the reflections were not quite right. They looked older, more worn, as if the time spent here had aged them beyond their years. Each new encounter brought more fear. They met creatures that looked like shadows come to life, their forms shifting and changing, always just out of reach. They heard whispers in the wind, calling them to stay, promising them wonders beyond their wildest dreams. But deep down, they knew the truth. Those promises were lies. As they ran, they stumbled upon a clearing filled with doors, each one more ominous than the last. Some were covered in vines, others were cracked and splintered, but all of them had a sense of foreboding. They had to choose, but how could they know which door would lead them home? Time was running out. They could feel the pull of their real home growing fainter, the laughter of their loved ones a distant memory. They had to make a choice, and they had to make it fast. In a moment of desperation, they reached for the nearest door, hoping against hope that it would be the one. They opened it, and a cold wind rushed out, carrying with it the sounds of laughter and joy. But as they stepped through, they found themselves in a dark, twisted version of their own home, where everything was wrong. The walls were covered in shadows, and the air was thick with despair. They saw their own reflections in the mirrors, but they were not themselves. They were trapped, lost in a world that looked like theirs but felt completely alien. Panic set in as they realized they had entered a nightmare. They had to escape this dark reflection of their home and find the real door before it was too late. They could feel the darkness closing in around them, a suffocating presence that threatened to swallow them whole. With their hearts pounding, they searched for a way out, but every corner they turned led them deeper into the nightmare. They could hear the whispers of the dark figure echoing in the shadows, taunting them, reminding them of the time they had lost. Just when they thought all hope was lost, they spotted a flickering light in the distance. It was small but bright, a beacon of hope in the overwhelming darkness. They ran toward it, fueled by desperation and fear, knowing it was their only chance. As they approached, they realized it was another door, but this one felt different. It pulsed with energy, and they could hear the faint sound of their loved ones calling them from the other side. They reached for the handle, but the darkness surged around them, trying to pull them back. They had to fight. They had to push through the fear and the shadows that threatened to consume them. With a final burst of strength, they opened the door and stepped through, leaving the nightmare behind. They tumbled into their living room, breathless and shaken. The door behind them vanished, leaving only the familiar warmth of home. They had escaped the alternate reality, but they knew they would never forget the horrors they had faced. As they hugged each other tightly, they realized something important. They had to cherish every moment, every laugh, and every memory because time was precious. They had danced with darkness and come back to the light, but the memory of the door to nowhere would always linger in their minds. And so, they vowed never to forget the lessons learned in that strange, dreamlike world. They would always keep their doors locked, but they would also keep their hearts open to the wonders of life. After all, the scariest stories often teach us the most important truths. As they settled in for the night, they couldn't shake the feeling that the door to nowhere could return. They promised each other to stay close and always be ready for whatever adventures lay ahead, knowing that together, they could face anything, even the darkest of fears. And as they drifted off to sleep, the shadows danced just outside their windows, waiting for the next opportunity to pull someone into their dreamlike world. But for now, they were safe, wrapped in the warmth of their home, where love and laughter would always keep the darkness at bay. Yet, something felt off. The air in the house changed, thickening with an unease that crept into their dreams. One by one, they began to have the same nightmare, a shadow whispering their names, calling them closer. It promised secrets, adventures, and the thrill of the unknown. But they all felt the cold grip of fear, the whispers filled with a sinister intent that left them shivering under their blankets. The next morning, they awoke, tired and restless. The sunlight streamed through the windows, but it failed to shatter the lingering dread. They tried to brush it off, laughing about bad dreams over breakfast, but an unsettling feeling made their stomachs twist. Later, as they settled down to watch a movie together, The screen flickered repeatedly, each time showing distorted images. Faces twisted in agony flashed for a moment, gone as quickly as they appeared. Confusion turned to horror when they realized those faces looked eerily familiar. They were reflections of themselves, twisted and agonized, trapped in darkness as if they were begging for help. "Did you see that?" One of them gasped, but the others dismissed it, convincing themselves it was just a glitch. Still, a ripple of discomfort ran through them. They tried to laugh it off, but unease took root. That night, as the wind howled outside, they heard whispers floating down the hall. A soft voice called out, beckoning them to listen. They huddled together, anxiety building with each passing second. "What if it's just the wind?" someone suggested, but it did little to calm the growing dread. The whispers became clearer, words they couldn't quite make out, but the tone sent chills down their spines. Unable to resist, they crept towards the source, hearts pounding in unison. The voice seemed to float from the basement, a dark and forbidding space filled with old memories and forgotten treasures. The door creaked open slowly, revealing a staircase shrouded in darkness. It felt like they were being drawn into a void, the chill of the air wrapping around them like 1,000 icy fingers. They hesitated, glancing at each other, but the voice continued to call. It promised them answers, treasures, and perhaps even the solace they sought from their nightmarish fantasies. One by one, they stepped forward, drawn into the shadows, each footfall echoing in the stillness. The basement was colder than they expected, the walls closing in around them. They turned on their phones, and the dim light barely cut through the thick darkness. Suddenly, they noticed strange symbols painted on the walls, symbols that seemed to shift and move when they focused on them. Anxiety gripped them tightly, but the whispers grew louder, urging them to delve deeper. Then, they stumbled upon a small door hidden behind a pile of boxes. It was old, the wood dry and cracked, with a tarnished handle that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. The whispers intensified, now swirling around them like a tempest. "Open it! You must open it," they chanted, each voice merging into an eerie harmony. They shared nervous glances, but curiosity outweighed their fear. With trembling hands, one of them grasped the handle, barely able to breathe as they twisted it. The door creaked open, revealing a small, dimly lit room filled with mirrors. But these weren't ordinary mirrors. They showed not their reflections, but eerie, alternate versions of themselves, all trapped within. Each mirror vibrated with life, their doppelgangers pressing against the glass, mouths moving silently, screams lost in the void. Their eyes were wide with terror, pleading for freedom. "What is this place?" one asked, voice trembling. Is this real?" someone stammered, backing away, but the pull of the mirrors drew them in. They were lost in the grotesque reflections, unable to look away despite the rising panic. Shadows darted behind them, whispering dark promises and sweet, sickly lies about power and freedom that twisted through their minds. Suddenly, the lights flickered, plunging the room into darkness. The whispers faded, leaving only silence and the sound of their own breathing. In that stillness, they could feel something shift in the air, a presence lurking just beyond sight. Their hearts raced as they realized they were not alone. Out of the darkness, a figure emerged, cloaked and faceless. It moved like smoke, gliding silently closer. As it reached the mirrors, the reflections turned wild, faces screaming and reaching out, trying to escape. The figure raised an arm, and the mirrors began to tremble, cracks spiderwebbing across their surfaces. "We should go," someone shouted, pulling them back towards the stairs, but it was too late. The figure raised its other hand, and with a twisted grin, the mirrors pulsed. The room shook violently, darkness pouring out like a flood. They turned and fled, racing up the stairs, the shadows chasing them, fingers grasping at their heels. They burst through the basement door, slamming it behind them, breathing hard. But as they leaned against it, they heard faint tapping, an echoing sound that trickled from the other side. "What do we do?" one whispered, panic rising in their throats. They were trapped, the darkness creeping into their home, invading their sanctuary despite the door they thought had sealed away their fears. Suddenly, the lights flickered again, and the shadows began to coil around them, whispering their names in a sinister chorus. They could feel the familiar pull of the darkness, threatening to drown out the light of their laughter and love. Each heartbeat became a countdown, each second stretching longer, the room closing in around them. They knew they had to act fast, but every urge to run was met with a creeping paralysis. The whispers coiled around them, sweet yet bitter, promising release from their fears if they just leaned a little closer. And as they stood together, frozen in dread, a shadow rose taller than the others, its voice dripping with malice as it hissed, "Join us or forever be alone." A chill coursed through their veins, and the room darkened even more, wrapping them in an abyss that threatened to consume them whole. The flickering lights could hardly keep the shadows at bay, and with every breath, the nightmare that once felt like a dream now loomed terrifyingly real. There, in the suffocating darkness, they realized their only hope lay not in running, but in facing the shadows. They had to confront the darkness they had seen, the fears that whispered in their minds, and together, they would fight to reclaim their home from the void. As they braced themselves, the figure loomed closer, its presence pressing down upon them with an oppressive weight. "Your choice," it said, voice echoing in the silence. "Face your doom, or surrender your souls to eternal night." The air crackled with tension as the group stared into the abyss of shadow. Fear coiled tightly in their chests, and each heartbeat echoed like a war drum, urging them to decide. The darkness felt alive, twisting and writhing as if it hungered for their very essence. In an instant, one of them stepped forward, shaking but determined. "We won't give in to you," they said, voice steady despite trembling knees. "We're not afraid." But the shadows only laughed, a chilling sound that curled around their ankles, pulling them closer to the floor. The figure masked in darkness took a step forward, and with it a wave of cold wrapped around them. "Fear is part of you. It seeps into your bones. It makes you easy prey," it hissed, the words dripping with malice. The others felt the truth in those words, a wall of dread rising between resolve and panic. To fight was to confront their deepest terrors, those creeping thoughts that gnawed at the edges of their minds. In that moment, flickers of their fears danced before them, momentarily materializing in the shadows behind the figure. A fear of failure, a haunting loss, the weight of immense sorrow. As the darkness swirled, an image began to form, a twisted reflection of their own lives, weighed down by shadows. With every second, the images became clearer, nightmarish scenarios of betrayal, loneliness, and chaos. They gasped as they witnessed their most profound fears laid bare. One friend watched in horror as their family turned against them. Another saw their once cherished memories fade into nothingness. Suddenly, the whispers transformed into shrieks, rising echoes of torment and despair clawing at their minds. "Make it stop!" someone cried out, covering their ears, trying to shut out the cacophony. Yet the unseen figure simply smiled wider, feeding off their fear, drawing strength from their panic. "Are these not your realities?" it taunted, gesturing to the nightmarish visions. "You're all destined to fail, destined to be alone. Join the darkness, and your fears will become your power." That offer hung heavy in the air, sweet and seductive, tugging at the edges of their resolve. They could almost feel it, the enticing embrace of the shadows promising safety from hurt, freedom from fear. A heavy weight pressed against their minds, each of them glancing at one another with uncertainty, the idea of surrender fluttering through their thoughts like a moth drawn to a flame. Gathering her courage, one friend shouted, "No, we're stronger than you think." She stepped forward, clenching her fists, energized by a spark of defiance. "We choose to fight. We choose to face what you've shown us." The shadow figure recoiled slightly, hesitation flickering through its dark form. A silent moment passed, the group's resolve swelling as they joined hands. They formed a circle of defiance, channeling their fears into a singular power, pooling their strength against the encroaching darkness. Then, their voices rose together, a chorus of hope that filled the room, drowning out the whispers. "We are not our fears. We are not alone." The shadows writhed violently. Shrieks of displeasure echoed within the confines of their makeshift circle. A sudden blast of wind surged through the room, blowing against their skin, dispelling the chill that had settled like fog. The figure roared in anger, its voice cutting through the air like a blade. "You think you can escape? You think light can banish me?" It lunged toward them, a wave of darkness crashing against their unity. But instead of faltering, they stood firm, the light of their resolve shimmering brightly around them, pushing back against the encroaching shadows. "Stay strong," one shouted. The words were like fuel, igniting their hearts. Images of joy, love, and laughter surged through their minds, memories that shone brightly in the darkness like stars scattered across a black sky. It was enough to send shockwaves through the shadows, fracturing the suffocating darkness surrounding them. With each moment, they felt the power of their combined will grow, shattering the illusions that had been laid before them. The figure screamed, a terrible sound, as their light sliced through the shroud of darkness, revealing its true form beneath. Nothing more than a flickering shadow, a defeated entity that thrived on fear, now thrown into chaos. Realizing their strength, they pressed forward, a living wall of light and hope pushing against the dark presence. "We are more than our fears," they cried again in unison, pushing that brightness deeper into the depths of despair. "You have no power here." And just then, the room swelled with light, a brilliant radiance that spilled forth, illuminating every corner. The shadows recoiled violently, shredded by the purity of their energy. The mirrored room began to dissolve, the walls melting away like wax under fierce heat. Instead of a chaotic void, they saw something else forming, a glimpse of a path leading to safety, a golden light shining brighter than anything they had ever known. But as they pushed forward, something twisted within the shadows, an anger born of rage and desire. Dark tendrils lashed out, grasping at them desperately, tugging at their ankles and pulling them off balance. "You cannot escape," it bellowed, the voice echoing through the chaos. "You will always carry me with you." Fear wrapped its icy fingers around one of their throats, and for a split moment, doubt crept in. But they shook their heads, together, every ounce of their souls pressed against the darkness, unwavering. They linked tighter, hearts beating a steady drum against the chaos, refusing to let go. With one final push fueled by every ounce of belief they had, they surged forward. The shadows screeched in defeat, dissolving into nothingness as they flooded into the radiant light. The darkness lifted, transforming into brilliant colors, swirling and dancing around them. And just like that, they found themselves standing in a beautifully lit hall. But as they looked around, unease flickered in their eyes. The hall felt too quiet, too perfect. It was almost serene, yet there was an undercurrent of something sinister. "Did we win?" one of them whispered, glancing back toward where the shadows had been, searching for a sign of life. The air was still now, but it filled with a lingering dread. Shadows still lingered at the periphery of their vision, swirling just beyond the light's reach. An unsettling chill ran through the air, a stark contrast to the warmth around them. It felt as if they were being watched actively, remnants of darkness still lurking in the corners. They took a step forward, but the floorboards creaked unnervingly underneath them, as if warning them to stay away. Shadows danced along the walls, distorting their reflections into mocking visages. With each step, the doubts began to rise again, whispering insidiously of the darkness yet to come. "Did we really escape?" another asked cautiously, eyes darting nervously around. "What is this place?" Then, a low rumble echoed through the hall, shaking the ground beneath them. A door at the end of the hall creaked open slowly, and with it came a whiff of stale air, the scent of decay seeping into the hopeful illusion around them. Their hearts raced, breaths quickening as a figure emerged from the depths of the shadows behind the door. It was cloaked in darkness, gliding forward with a confidence that sent a fresh wave of fear pounding through their chests. "Welcome back," it said, its voice smooth and chilling. "You thought you could leave, didn't you?" The figure stepped into the flickering light, and their hearts dropped. Its features were a grotesque mockery of familiarity, twisting into shapes that resembled those they loved but distorted by malice. Their faces were stretched and warped, frozen in expressions of anguish that seemed to pulse with the darkness surrounding them. The room grew colder, a sickening sense of dread and loss gnawed at their insides. "You left so quickly," it continued, its gaze piercing through them like ice. "But did you really think you could sever the ties that bind you to your fears? Those bonds are eternal." They stepped back, instinctively distancing themselves from the dark figure. The walls began to close in, shadows creeping with every beat of their hearts, thickening the air until it felt suffocating. Whispers slithered through the hall, rising and falling like the breaths of the damned, filling their minds with echoes of past failures and hidden secrets they thought were buried. One of them, sensing the profound despair settling over them, turned to flee. "We need to get out of here." The words barely left their mouth before the door slammed shut with an ear-shattering bang, reverberating through the hall like the tolling of a funeral bell. They all spun to look, dread pooling in their stomachs. "There is no escape," the figure hissed, its voice thick with blatant satisfaction. "You think this light can protect you? You're trapped in your own creation." It raised a hand, palm open, and shadows flickered, forming dark tendrils that snaked along the floor, creeping toward them. Panic erupted. They scattered, searching for any weakness in the darkness pressing down on them. Each friend ran in different directions, but walls shifted and twisted around them, hallways elongating into impossible lengths that split apart like fractals. Desperation grew, making it hard to breathe. Each gasp felt like swallowing shards of glass as isolation wrapped around them, pulling them further into the depths of their own darkness. In that chaos, one of them stumbled into an abandoned room, its walls covered in old, peeling wallpaper that seemed to pulsate in rhythm with their racing heart. Shadows clung to every corner, a heavy blanket of despair that left no light untouched. A mirror hung crookedly on one wall, its surface dark and murky, as if it had absorbed years of sorrow. As they approached the mirror, something inside stirred. A face emerged, not their own, but a reflection of someone they had lost. A mother's mournful gaze gripped their soul, eyes filled with unfinished business, pain, and regret. "Help me," the figure whispered, lips moving soundlessly as if trapped behind a veil. The urge to reach out was overwhelming, a bond deeper than life, stronger than fear. "Get away," they screamed, backing away, but the face twisted into a silent wail, dark tendrils reaching through the mirror, clawing at reality. The air darkened, swirling with the cries of the lost and the forgotten, chilling their bones until they could barely move. Meanwhile, the others were not faring any better. One friend was drawn to a flickering light through a doorway, believing it to be salvation. Yet what awaited was a flickering apparition of his former self, draped in layers of despair and loneliness. "Remember when you ran?" the ghostly figure mocked. "You were always so quick to leave behind those who loved you." A chill swept through him, gnawing at his will. "No, this isn't real," he shouted. Yet the image persisted, feeding on his guilt, wrapping its fingers around his heart until it felt like it would burst under the pressure. The specter advanced, whispering secrets that cut deeper than any knife. "You can't escape the pain you've caused. It will always find you." The situation was spiraling, hope slipping through their fingers like sand. They regrouped, agitated whispers inundating their fear-laden thoughts. "What do we do now?" one cried, eyes wide with terror, scanning the darkened hallways that pulsed with unseen threats. Huddled tightly, they realized they had to confront their darkest fears head-on. "Fight it," one declared, though the shiver in their voice betrayed doubt. "We have to remember, the light is within us." They joined hands, forming a circle once more, But now the shadows loomed closer, pulsing in time with their breath, growing thick, eager for their surrender. "Let's bring the light back," another shouted, drawing strength from the memories of laughter, love, and the sweetest of moments they had shared before the shadows invaded. With every positive thought, they felt the warmth rising inside them, pushing out the cold. A fight lit up in their eyes, igniting a spark against the mounting darkness. Together, they chanted, their voices intertwining, building a resonance that pulsed through the room. Around them, a light began to form, radiant and shimmering, spreading outwards and battling the darkness. The shadows shrieked, retreating momentarily under the onslaught of their combined brilliance. And yet the dark figure stood, visibly shaken but defiant. "Foolish children," it growled, its voice brimming with disdain. "You think this light will save you? It only makes your suffering more delicious." With these words, reality shifted. The walls of the room crumbled to reveal nightmarish landscapes beyond. The twisted forms of lost souls writhed in darkness, tangled and clawing at their ankles, desperately emitting a symphony of wails. Memories resurfaced, inflicting pain as visions of regret swept through them. They could see their failures, their betrayals, pain radiating from every corner as the entity grew larger, twisting into horrifying shapes. "Remember how it felt to lose?" it taunted, figures appearing in the shadows, friends and loved ones pleading for help, their voices echoing with such sorrow that it pierced through even the light they created. Despair crept back in, threatening to snuff out their flickering flame. But as they breathed in the grief of those visions, something shifted. The warmth coalesced, surging brighter as they pushed through the despair. "We can't forget them, but we can live for them," one cried, driven by an urgency that rekindled the light within. "We carry their memories with love. That gives us strength." With newfound determination, they channeled their collective strength, pouring every ounce of love and light they had into their chant, their voices merging into a final crescendo. The walls vibrated with their conviction, and in that moment of unity, the darkness began to waver. The figure writhed, its form flickering dangerously. "You may have power, but you cannot escape your pain," it shrieked, attempts to drag them back into despair, failing as the light pulsed with newfound vigor. "Watch us," they shouted defiantly, a wave of brilliance cascading through the room. The shadows shrieked and recoiled, desperately grasping at the light. The air thickened, and for a moment, they thought they sensed a shift, a surge of something like hope breaking through. Together, they repeated, the mantra flowing with desperation and power. As the light swelled, shadows cracked, splintering against the barriers of their resolve. More knots of darkness unfurled, their grip weakening in the wake of the light they forged from love and remembrance. And then they pushed forward, guided by that breathtaking warmth, shoving against the dark being, forcing it back step by step until a single bright burst erupted in the heart of their fear. "Enough," it howled, a raw sound of rage bracketed by despair as it melted away from their determination. In an instant, they were engulfed in light, the fractured shadows screaming as they dissolved into nothingness, leaving behind an echoing silence. Finally, they stood there, panting and sweating, awash in a sea of light where darkness had once reigned. Everything felt strangely still, daylight filtering through the cracks. Yet as they looked around, uncertainty gripped them once more. Was it truly over? With hesitant steps, they turned to the familiar hall and caught a glimpse of reflected light bouncing off the now illuminated walls. There was no familiar laughter, no echoes of joy, just the quiet uncertainty lingering in the air. As they stepped closer, they noticed something etched into the mirror's surface. Words formed in a scrawl, déjà vu creeping up their spines. "You can conquer today, but your fears don't vanish. They will return." A shiver crawled up their spines, realization dawning like a creeping shadow, just waiting in the wings of their memories. Familiar voices stirred around them, the echoes of their loved ones fading into an unsettling echo of laughter, distant, mocking, whispering warnings carried on the breeze. As they stood in the revelation of their escape, they couldn't shake the lingering sensation that perhaps this was only the beginning of a much darker journey. Shadows lingered just out of sight, hints of the darkness they had thought they vanquished, lurking in the place where hope met despair, and questions lay heavy in the air unanswered. Did we defeat it? One whispered uncertainly, eyes wide, scanning the perimeter, looking for the sinister remnants of their ordeal. The response was grave, heavy with unspoken truths, and somewhere deep, they felt the weight of it growing. We may not be free of its grasp yet, and in that moment, they knew the fight was far from over. Did we defeat it? One whispered uncertainly, eyes wide, scanning the perimeter, looking for the sinister remnants of their ordeal. The response was grave, heavy with unspoken truths, and somewhere deep, they felt the weight of it growing. We may not be free of its grasp yet. The air thickened as they stood in the dim room, the flickering lights casting distorted shadows that flittered across the walls like restless phantoms. Each rustle seemed amplified, a low whisper echoing in the corners of their minds. It felt as if the walls were watching, waiting for a moment of vulnerability, the cracks in their resolve ready to be exploited. Suddenly, a low, sinister hum vibrated through the floor, pulsing beneath their feet. It swelled at the back of their skulls, a deep resonance that set their nerves on edge. "Did you hear that?" Someone ventured, their voice trembling, half a question, half a plea for reassurance. But the others were silent, their expressions taut with dread. The hum grew louder, an unsettling invitation that seemed to promise both revelation and horror. Then, without warning, the lights flickered once more, plunging them into darkness. Heartbeats thudded against the silence, the only sound as thick shadows enveloped them. In that instant of blackness, they each felt a cold breath against their skin, sending shivers racing down their spines. It was a ghostly caress, too intimate, too foreboding. As the light returned, the room appeared different. The walls had elongated, stretching unnaturally. The mirror now stood cracked, webbed lines snaking across its surface like veins pulsing with a dark life of their own. Glimpses of movement flitted past their periphery, just out of reach. Each glance into the mirror revealed fleeting images of faces they thought they knew, twisted in torment, mouthing silent screams that resonated deep within their bones. "Stay close," one urged, voice barely above a whisper. Yet it was swallowed by the growing cacophony of whispers that slithered through the air, wrapping around their minds like a sinister embrace. The sound crescendoed into a chaotic dissonance, filled with tones of heartache, betrayal, and raw fear. It echoed their own insecurities, amplifying every worry they had dared to bury. Then they heard footsteps, soft and hesitant at first, but growing closer, too intentional to be mere figments of their imagination. The void around them thickened, swallowing the light in a way that felt predatory, waiting for one of them to yield to that intoxicating terror. They turned in unison, and what they saw made their blood run cold. A figure emerged from the swirling shadows, its silhouette barely discernible, but unmistakably human, or what had once been human. The outline twisted, an amalgam of familiar traits warped and exaggerated, a vengeful parody of someone they loved dearly. A face, framed by dark tendrils that resembled long fingers weaving through midnight hair, bore a profound sorrow and rage that cut. "Why did you leave me?" the apparition rasped, voice echoing in a chilling chorus, a refrain that was both haunting and beautiful. Each syllable dripped with anguish, twisting the knife of guilt deeper into their hearts. Panic surged, the air thickening with the weight of their memories tethered to that figure. With every word, shadows undulated at its feet, reaching out as if to pull the tethered spirit back into the depths of despair. "The darkness grows stronger here," another cried, their voice frantic as they stumbled backward, almost tripping over their own feet. The familiarity of the voice was suffocating, and yet so alien in its current form. A trembling hand shot out, fingers splayed wide, desperation blurring the lines between the past and present. The ghost took a step forward, light dancing off its hollow eyes. "You left me to rot," it hissed, and the air turned sour, festering with memories of betrayal. Every mistake they could no longer deny surfacing like bubbles in a boiling pot. The realization hit hard. This was not just a figment, but a manifestation of their own buried regrets. With a shared glance steeped in understanding, they prepared to fight back. They had faced the darkness before, hadn't they? Perhaps they could do it again. "We won't let you go," someone shouted defiantly, brandishing the light like a weapon, refusing to submit to the oppressive weight of their past. Echoing back to them, the words hung in the air, almost mocking in their hollow resolve. But as the creature recoiled, its form flickering, their light began to fade. The whispers crescendoed into a deafening roar of memories, drowning their resolve beneath an ocean of pain and self-doubt. The walls vibrated with the thickened despair, shadows drawing in closer, eager to envelop them in a smothering shroud. Then came the crashing sound, a violently loud shatter that echoed through the room as shards from the broken mirrors scattered around them like jagged teeth. The pieces gleamed ominously, each reflecting not just their faces, but the twisted memories that haunted them. "Pick them up," someone yelled, driven by fear, and they did, trembling fingers wrapping around the sharp edges. With each shard, they glimpsed their past, the moments of joy now tainted with regret. Laughter that had turned bitter, love fueled by neglect, echoed in their minds more vividly than the shadows that closed in. A surge of anger ignited within them, scorching away the chill of helplessness, and they glared at the specter that seemed to grow larger with their rising fear, feeding on it like a dark fire. "We see you," they shouted, lifting the shards higher, the light shimmering through the cracks like stars peering through blackened clouds. The figure writhed, its torment morphing into rage, glowing with a malevolent energy that threatened to engulf the room. "You cannot erase me," it screeched, a shrill sound clawing at the corners of their minds. "Maybe not," another of them yelled, "but we can stop you from taking us." The air crackled with tension, and in a moment of desperation, they hurled the shards towards the apparition. Each piece of glass cut through the darkness, bursting with light upon impact, scattering the shadows in bright arcs. The ghost screamed, a sound so raw that it echoed through every fiber of their being, reverberating like a clanging bell of doom. But the darkness fought back, enmeshing closer, stealthily wrapping around their legs like a cold tide, threatened but unyielding. It clawed at their confidence, whispering doubts that spiraled through their heads, tales of failure and loss entwining tightly around their hearts. "Don't listen to it," they urged each other, standing firm as the shadows thickened like a looming storm. "We are not alone in this." Yet the shadows grew darker still, the depths of their fears plunging into a bottomless abyss, each voice merging into a singular, oppressive knowledge of their own frailties. The oppressive weight of their past loomed, the room pulsing with uncertainty. Where once there had been resolve, now lay shrouded doubts, gnawing at the edges of their minds, tempting them to relinquish their fight. They were worn, exhausted, and confused, grappling with the real horror that their greatest fears were not external, but intertwined within them, feeding into the very darkness they hoped to escape. With one final surge of clarity, someone stepped forward, determination etched in every line of their face. "We must remember who we are," they proclaimed, voice strong and resolute, a beacon cutting through the smothering gloom. "We've made mistakes, yes, but we rise despite them. We can't let this thing use our past against us." As that fire ignited once more, the shadows flickered, uncertain and hesitant. They joined hands, each grip tightening against the darkness as warmth fanned outwards, illuminating their resolve. One by one, they echoed the sentiment, memories of their triumphs awakening the embers of courage hidden beneath the despair. The air shimmered, rising against the oppressive tide as they pushed through the veil of shadows, igniting a sanctuary of light from within. They cried out together, harmonizing their strengths, "We will face our pain, We will overcome. The voices reverberated, casting aside doubt, the energy flowing back and forth like a living pulse, pushing the darkness back toward the fringes. The figure screamed, fierce and wild, its form warping against their collective light. It flailed, screaming words soaked in vengeance and sorrow, but the consolidated strength of their unity began to form a barrier, a shimmering circle of hope that repelled the encroaching dark. We will not be defined by what has haunted us, they shouted in unison, the light intensifying with their resolve. As the dark figure shrieked, writhing violently in the containment of their light, its features became more distorted, once familiar aspects twisted into a grotesque representation of their deepest fears. But with every additional piece of light drawn from their hearts, the illusion faded, scattering the shadows and tearing at the seams of that dark reality. Then came a powerful shudder, the ground vibrating beneath them as they felt the very fabric around them starting to unravel. It felt like salvation and horror, inviting them to step into a brighter world, but tethered by the ghostly echoes of their remorse. And in that moment, a choice solidified, a poignant understanding that they could embrace not just the light, but the entirety of their lives. The light and the darkness intertwined, each moment a brushstroke in the canvas of their existence. The battle had carved its place within them, but they were the ones who appointed meaning to that experience. Yet, shadows lurked in the corners of their vision, the fight far from over. Dark laughter whispered from the distance, and though they triumphed, an unsettling feeling gripped their hearts. As they stepped forward into the blinding light, a chilling thought crept into their minds. Perhaps this was just another beginning, and the darkness remained, adapting, waiting for them to falter once more. The unsettling thought clung to their minds as they ventured deeper into the light, an overwhelming sense of dread washing over them. With each step, the air felt heavier, charged with an electric energy that buzzed in their ears like a swarm of angry bees. Flickering shadows danced at the edges of their vision, pulling at the seams of their newfound courage as if to remind them that darkness lurked just beyond their reach. The once comforting glow morphed into something more sinister, the light now casting grotesque shapes that twisted and writhed on the walls, almost mocking them. Faces appeared in the shifting shadows, distorted expressions of anguish frozen in silence, their mouths moving furiously in silent screams. It was as if the very walls held onto the remnants of tortured souls, crying out for release or revenge, leaving an icy grip of terror coiling around their hearts. "Did you see that?" One of them gasped, eyes wide as he pointed toward a corner where the shadows thickened like black smoke, swirling impossibly. The group hesitated, the bond of their unity wavering as gloom seeped into their ranks. An icy breeze brushed past, whispering through their ears, carrying indistinct words that were hauntingly familiar, yet impossible to grasp. It felt like a spectral hand, casual and intimate, brushing the back of their necks, coaxing them to succumb to the terror. Suddenly, the ground trembled beneath their feet, vibrating with a low, guttural growl that set their nerves alight. The temperature plunged, breath turning into mist that hung heavy between them like a noose. "We're not alone," a voice echoed from somewhere deep within the shadows, sending a fresh wave of despair through them. They turned, eyes wide, scanning the enveloping darkness as it pulsed like a heartbeat, growing more ominous with each passing moment. A hollow laughter erupted from the void, chilling their very bones. "You tried to escape, didn't you?" It taunted, the sound slithering and curling into their minds, making their stomachs churn. But there's no escape from the truth. The tension throbbed in the air, a noxious mixture of fear and anger boiling within them. The whispers grew louder, carrying fragments of their past mistakes, each one punctuated with a distorted memory that clawed at their sanity. With renewed apprehension, they huddled closer together, desperation mounting as they frantically searched for a way to banish the pervasive fear that gripped them. Just then, a flicker of movement caught their eye. A shadow darted past them, weaving in and out of the light like a dark wraith, its form barely recognizable. It was there one moment and gone the next, leaving behind only a lingering sense of dread that hung in the air. What was that?" whispered someone at the back, their voice barely a breath, but it cut through them like shards of ice. Their hearts raced as paranoia clawed to the surface, each one of them playing a nightmarish game of what-ifs. What if they weren't alone? What if the shadows were alive, feeding off their fears, hunting them in the dark recesses of their minds? Without warning, the ground beneath them stirred ominously, shifting like quicksand. Unearthly sounds echoed around them, sobs scraping nails, and the unmistakable sound of something dragging across stone. They had entered a realm where reality crumbled, morphing into the hollow specter of their regrets. The once familiar paths twisted grotesquely, guiding them deeper into a labyrinth where even their own voices echoed back, distorted and laced with despair. "If we stick together, we can make it through," someone encouraged, but doubt gnawed at them harder than before. The shadows seemed to be listening, lurking nearer, and with every word of motivation, the darkness enveloped them further. Shapes began to materialize in the blackness, looming figures with gaping mouths and hollow eyes that glowed an unsettling red, like embers of a dying fire. The fear was palpable, thick as smoke, as they pressed onward. Each step felt heavier than the last, their feet now dragging as if the ground itself sought to hold them down. A new sound emerged, a low, rhythmic thumping that matched their heartbeats, pulsating through the air like a war drum heralding doom. Glancing over their shoulders, they felt a presence, a shadow darker than the rest, creeping closer with each heartbeat. "Run!" someone shouted, voice cracking with terror, and they tore away from the oppressive darkness, racing down corridors that grew tighter, the walls closing in like an angry maw, hungry for their fear. They could feel unseen hands grasping at their clothes, slick with an otherworldly chill. Shadows suddenly lunged from both sides, clawing at their ankles with nails like knives, tugging them back into the depths of despair. As they ran, the laughter echoed once more, deep and throaty, possessing a cruel joy as their every misstep caused them to stumble. One by one, they fumbled, falling into the darkness with cries swallowed into the abyss. "No! Don't let go!" someone screamed, reaching out, but the distance stretched like a chasm, and the void swallowed their voices, leaving only a deafening silence in its wake. With desperation fueling their every stride, the remaining few pressed on, their breaths coming out in panicked gasps. Shadows enveloped them, boundless and menacing, transforming the space around them into a nightmarish landscape where reality shifted. They found themselves standing upon a creaking bridge of shadows, suspended over a bottomless pit of darkness that seemed to pulsate with an insatiable hunger. "What do we do?" someone cried, clearly on the verge of breaking, their eyes wide as they scanned the void, unsure of where to go or how to escape. As they huddled together on that teetering bridge, the shadows began to swirl, coalescing into a shape, an indistinct figure with luminous eyes that glared down at them with unfathomable hatred. No longer were they just figments of their imagination. Now they were forces that thrived on their despair, gathering strength from their shared anguish. The figure stepped forward, inching closer, the ground beneath them shaking violently, and disjointed voices echoed within that spectral form, weaving together a cacophony of their past, spelling their doom in a language woven from fear and regret. "You belong to us now," it hissed, a grotesque mockery of a human voice, filled with malicious intent. "You cannot escape the choices you've made." As if responding to the terror that engulfed them, the walls around them split and groaned, drawing back to reveal a warped mirror, reflecting only fragmented images of themselves, versions that had long been buried. Each face stared back in horror, their features twisted into grotesque masks, filled with despair, guilt, and a longing for absolution. Within that reflection lay a dreadful truth, the shadow lurking behind every choice they'd ever made, every victim of their own negligence. In that moment, realization coursed through them, clarity breaking like dawn over a desolate landscape. They began to understand. The shadows were not just manifestations of their pain, but reflections of the choices they had made, the people they had hurt, and the truths they had chosen to ignore. If they were ever to escape this nightmare, they had to confront these specters, to look beyond the fear and face the reality they had tried so hard to outrun. Suddenly, as if summoned by their collective resolve, the light around them flickered back to life. With renewed courage, they stepped forward, determined to shatter the false reality that had so tightly bound them. They joined hands once more, forming a chain through which their combined strength surged. As they faced the approaching darkness, they channeled their energy into a single thought: acceptance. "We will no longer be prisoners of our past," they shouted in unison, and the ground trembled violently, the shadows recoiling, shrieking in fury at their defiance. The mirror crackled, shattering into 1,000 pieces, each reflecting a different version of themselves, 1,000 possibilities stretching into the void. At that moment, as the shards fell like rain, a deep, resonant voice echoed through the darkness. "Join us, and you may find freedom," it offered, a siren's call slicked with deceit. In the midst of their resolve, confusion washed over them like a tide, pulling at their sanity. The temptation was powerful, laced with promises of absolution and release, whispering sweet nothings that tugged at their hearts. The figures around them seemed to pulse, as if vying for the very life force that bound them together, quickening their breaths with promises that danced just out of reach. In that defining moment, they had to choose: either embrace the shadows that sought to ensnare them, or reject the spectral offers that threatened to consume them whole. With a steely gaze, they took a breath, uniting their voices in a powerful affirmation of hope. The shadows quivered, the intense darkness pressing against their resolve, but the light grew fiercer within them. With every ounce of strength, they screamed back, drowning out the whispers that sought to sway them, their voices mingling in a symphony of defiance. "We choose to face our truths," and as their resolve peaked, the darkness shattered, sending shockwaves through the shadows that echoed into nothingness. But they knew this wasn't the end. The shadows still lingered, waiting for their chance to strike once more. The future felt uncertain, a winding path ahead shrouded in mist. As the last echoes of despair faded into the abyss, a new clarity emerged. Their battle was far from over, and the darkness would remain a part of them, waiting for a moment of weakness, ready to resurface when least expected. Together, they stepped into the unfolding unknown, hearts beating with both apprehension and hope, prepared to confront whatever lay ahead, aware that true strength came not from defeating the shadows, but in rising to meet them head-on, learning to walk side by side with their fears instead of letting them consume every joy in their lives. But that hope faded quickly as the ground beneath them shifted once more. The mist thickened, wrapping around them like cold tendrils that squeezed tighter with each step. The darkness had not fully retreated. It was lurking just beyond the edge of their vision, watching, waiting. They moved cautiously, glancing nervously at each other, the flickering light that had guided them dimming with every moment they pressed deeper into the vast unknown. Suddenly, a sound echoed through the empty expanse, a wet, slithering noise that filled the air with a nauseating dread. The group froze, terror pulling them taut like strings ready to snap. A shadow unfurled, breaking off from the wall of mist, growing larger and more grotesque with each passing second. Its form rippled, shifting like smoke as it inched closer. Each movement dragged with the weight of 100 eyes boring into their souls. "Stay together," someone whispered, though their voice trembled, betraying their fear. The others nodded, gripping each other's arms tightly, but curiosity mingled with dread. They couldn't help but peer into the gloom, searching for what lurked ahead. The air grew heavy, thick with an unseen energy that buzzed with malevolence. Then, without warning, the figure lunged forward, revealing itself in a horrific display. It was a mass of contorted limbs and twisted faces, each one frozen in a grisly expression of agony and fear. The sight was gut-wrenching, a nightmarish parade of lost souls entangled in their own torment. They screamed, but the sound was muffled, swallowed by the cloying darkness around them. "We have to run," someone shouted, and the group turned, sprinting down the narrow path that twisted ahead, each corner feeling like it might lead straight into a deeper nightmare. The shadows chased, tendrils grasping at their ankles like spider webs, dragging them back into the ever-hungry void. As they ran, the scenery began to change. The walls morphed into a cavernous expanse, the ceiling so high it was lost in darkness. Strange symbols glowed dimly in the stone, pulsating as if breathing with some ancient power. Whispers filled the air, soft but insistent, bringing with them images of their failures and fears. Each one seemed woven into the very fabric of the cavern, creating a tapestry of despair that clung to them like a stench. "Keep moving," a voice urged, but it was barely a whisper, lost among the cacophony of regret that haunted them. Every step felt like stepping on broken glass, the sharp pains reminding them of everything they'd tried to escape. In moments of silence, the whispers morphed into chilling laughter, taunting them. Each echo reverberated in their minds, reminding them of choices they'd made and paths they'd abandoned, their secrets laid bare against the walls. Suddenly, the ground shifted again, revealing an opening that seemed to beckon them, a gaping maw of swirling darkness. Fear gripped them anew, but they hesitated. As they peered inside, a soft glow emerged from the depths, flickering like the last ember of a dying fire. Drawn by a mix of curiosity and terror, they edged closer, the light casting long shadows that danced around them. Out of the swirling darkness, a figure began to emerge. At first, it looked human, draped in ragged clothing, but as it stepped into the light, they recoiled in horror. Its face was pale as bone, with hollow eye sockets that seemed to bore into their very beings. It grinned, but the smile was far from welcoming. It was twisted, mocking, as if every terrible moment they'd experienced had been reduced to a spectacle for its amusement. "Welcome," the creature crooned, voice layered with an otherworldly echo that sent chills down their spines. "I've been waiting for you." They stumbled back, fear igniting once more as the blinding light flickered, casting the cavern into disarray. The visions of their past rolled before them. Every misdeed, every regret, flashed in rapid succession. They could feel the darkness sucking in their fear, growing stronger on the weight of their insecurities. All at once, the whispers morphed into a singular chilling command. "Join us." "Never!" one of them screamed, the word breaking the oppressive spell. Together they shouted defiantly, drawing strength from each other in the face of the creeping terror. They knew what they had to do. They would not let the shadows consume them. As the figure inched closer, a grotesque parade of the haunted swirled around it, each one begging for release, trapped in a never-ending cycle of pain. The light flickered and sputtered, casting ghastly shadows that seemed alive, each reaching out with hollow fingers, trying to pull them into the abyss. Heartbeats thundered in their ears, mingling with the shadows' relentless whispers. The weight of despair pressed heavily, choking them, but they fought against the tide. "Face it," one of them shouted suddenly, voice breaking through the chaos. "We can't run forever. We must confront our fears." The sentiment hung in the air, thick with emotion, a rallying cry in the midst of despair. As they gathered in a protective circle, the shadows shrieked, recoiling from the unexpected surge of light emanating from their unity. Encouraged, each person began to speak of their fears, their regrets spilling forth like a torrent, confronting the voices that had tormented them for so long. As each word left their lips, the shadows writhed and twisted, growing weaker, the familiar faces morphing into grotesque masks of anguish as they dissolved into the darkness. But the creature only laughed louder, its laughter reverberating off the walls like some unholy chorus. "You think you can overcome me with your stories? Your truths?" It stepped closer, the air thickening with pure malevolence, its smile growing wider, exposing rows of teeth that were more monstrous than human. I own your fears. You belong to me." "No," they shouted in unison, a forceful declaration that echoed deeper than they thought possible. They pushed against the encroaching darkness, hands clenched tight, channeling all their strength into one final stand. The cavern began to tremble, the walls vibrating with a life of their own, thrumming in response to their determination. As the confrontation escalated, the darkness writhed and pulsed, beginning to split like a thick fog under the rising sun. Cracks appeared in the ground beneath their feet, and from these fissures spilled an unsettling light, washed in hues that seemed to defy description, multicolored and pulsating, yet ominous, threading through the very fabric of the shadows themselves. The creature recoiled, frustration etched into its twisted features as it fought against the growing light, its desperation apparent. "This is not the end," it hissed, the words dripping with venom. It hesitated only for a moment, eyes glinting with a malevolent intelligence. With a shriek that shook the very stones of the cavern, it lunged forward, all teeth and claws, seeking to engulf them in a final, all-consuming darkness. In that instant, they felt a jolt of fear like they had never known. But they held firm, pouring every ounce of will into the light that now spilled forth around them, resisting the creature's attack. It backed away from the radiant warmth, and as it did, a collective gasp escaped their lips, a wave of realization washing over them. This was not just a battle against the darkness. It was a fight for their very souls. Their fears, once all-consuming, began to shatter, spilling out like shards of glass, each fragment reflecting an unwavering truth. In the chaos, they found themselves straining against the creature's onslaught, pulling together their fragmented memories and hopes to weave a new reality. But the fight was not over. As the shadows writhed and the creature lunged again, they could feel the oppressive weight of its wrath crashing against the radiant light, testing their resolve. They shut their eyes and inhaled deeply, embracing the fear head-on, knowing they could no longer run or hide. This time, they would confront it, embracing the power that lay within their collective strength. Together, they shouted, rallying forth, the very words propelling them forward. As the unforgiving darkness crashed against their united front, the light flared brighter, illuminating the cavern in a burst of brilliance that sent shockwaves through the monster that threatened to devour them. And for the first time, they felt the power surge from within, a fire igniting that they only just discovered had always been there, waiting for this very moment to break free. The light surged, pulsing as if it had a life of its own, filling the cavern with an incandescent glow that cut through the thick atmosphere of dread. It pushed back against the shadowy mass, and for a moment, the creature faltered, its eyes narrowing in pure malice. The air around them crackled with tension, a palpable force swirling like a storm about to unleash its fury. As they united in their resolve, memories began to surface, each one a haunting echo of fear and pain. The anguish of abandoned loved ones, the betrayal of old friends, the suffocating weight of expectations. Each recollection ignited emotions that wove through them, and as they faced their nightmares, the shadows struggled to maintain their form, twisting and contorting in agony. Suddenly, a cold draft swept through the cavern, extinguishing the light flickering at their feet. The walls echoed an ominous hum, resonating with the creature's rage. It lunged forward again, faster this time, its limbs a blur of darkness, reaching out with an insatiable hunger for their very essence. They felt the chill wash over them, hearts pounding as icy fingers grazed their skin. Panic surged, but they fought back against the engulfing fear. Every flicker of light illuminated fragments of the creature's horrific visage, the glistening teeth, the empty sockets where eyes should have been, a mouth twisted into a grin that suggested terribly joyful anticipation of their despair. "Remember," one shouted, their voice sharp as the crack of thunder. "Remember who we are." Fueled by this declaration, they began to recount their stories, voices rising together, a cacophony of defiance amid the onslaught. The light grew stronger, momentarily banishing the shadows to the far corners of the cavern. Each tale told became a weapon, striking at the heart of the monstrosity before them. The figure recoiled, screeching, a sound that reverberated through their bones, chilling and unnatural. But in that moment of brightness, the darkness began to twist anew. The cavern walls warped, the flickering shadows coiling around them like serpents ready to strike. More whispers joined the existing ruckus, drawing out echoes of long-ignored fears, spreading like a disease. The sounds morphed from soft murmurs to shrill cries, weaving a sinister melody that clawed at their sanity. "You think you can escape?" A voice hissed from every corner, slippery and smooth like oil. It echoed in distorted laughter, brushing against their minds, probing for cracks in their resolve. "You are already mine. Look around you." They glanced hesitantly at the cavern's walls, and what they saw made bile rise in their throats. Faces formed in the stone, twisted in anguish and despair. Each mouth stretched in a silent scream, eyes wide with terror. Some were familiar, loved ones they had lost or turned away from, trapped forever in their own personal prisons. "Help us," a voice broke through, raspy and faint, pulling them closer to the walls, their hands almost reaching out involuntarily, as if the stone itself yearned for them. They could feel the pull, felt the urge to empathize with the suffering trapped within, but something inside screamed to resist, to hold on to their own reality. But as they stood there, entranced, the figure lunged once more, a furious whirlwind of shadow and rage. It twisted through the air, scattering their focus, and the cavern began to shake violently, rocks and debris raining down like a torrential storm. Each tremor sent shock waves of fear through their bodies. "Let go of your light," it howled, a burst of frustration igniting the air as shadows crept closer, drawing nearer on the ground with intent. They could feel the weight of despair trying to settle over their shoulders, like a blanket damp with the chill of forgotten winters. Just then, the ground beneath them cracked open, revealing a void deeper than their worst fears, a swirling pit of darkness pulsing with an ominous heartbeat. They peered into its depths, and the sight was overwhelming. It was a vortex of memories, their failures, moments of regret, the darkest corners of their souls. And just beyond, the whispers escalated, begging, pleading for release. "Jump!" someone shouted unexpectedly. "We must confront it." Confusion took hold, but the urgency in that voice cut through the noise. As they moved closer to the edge, the shadows became frantic, lashing out like angry serpents trying to reclaim their prey. Each face within the walls twisted further, a grotesque and palpable fear, their suffering believing and telling them they were about to fall into oblivion. Yet this was the moment. With a collective breath, they jumped, plummeting into the swirling darkness that beckoned them. The descent was surreal. Time stretched and warped, spiraled into an abyss that felt like slipping through the fabric of reality itself. An unrelenting wind howled around them, carrying the whispers of the past like a chilling symphony. Each second felt like an eternity filled with dread, and just as they believed they would be lost to the void forever, a light burst forth within the darkness, blinding and warm. It engulfed them completely, pulling them from the brink of despair. They found themselves standing in a serene landscape, a stark contrast to the chaos they had just experienced. The sky glowed in soft pastels, and a gentle breeze caressed their skin, as if washing away the weight of their fears. But beneath the surface of this beauty lay an unsettling silence, chilling and empty. Shadows lingered at the edges of their vision, watching, waiting, whispering. They felt the pressure build again, the all-consuming awareness of something sinister lurking just beyond the welcoming facade. "Don't let it fool you," someone murmured, their voice taut with anxiety. "It's not over." Realization struck them like a hammer. The creature could manipulate reality itself, weaving illusions to draw them in, to momentarily render them vulnerable. As the tranquil scene beckoned, shadows began encroaching, stretching their fingers toward them, intent on dragging them back into despair. The landscape shifted abruptly, colors bleeding into chaos as the figures of their memories began to rise around them, spectral and twisted. Each face that emerged told a story of betrayal, loss, and unfulfilled dreams, their eyes pleading for recognition, for understanding. In this place, they were again confronted by what they had tried to escape, a mirror reflecting their unvoiced fears and regrets, a haunting reminder of the battles they thought they had left behind. "Stay strong," someone cried, though their voice quivered, fear slipping through the cracks in their resolve. They could feel doubt creeping back in, but they forged forward against the tide of shadows that sought to close in to consume them whole. Just as they regrouped, attempting to shield one another from the encroaching dark, the ground trembled once again. A storm brewed overhead, clouds swirling ominously, darkening the once serene sky. The shadows began to swirl faster, forming a vortex above them, and from this swirling darkness, they felt the familiar pull of dread rising anew, a force that demanded submission. And then, the creature emerged from the center, larger than before, with tendrils of shadow reaching out like gnarled hands, eager for submission. "You cannot fight what you are," it shrieked, voice reverberating through the air with a potent despair, mixing with their own fears. "You are nothing without your pain." As the words struck them, they felt the echo of truth. But in this moment, with light burning in their hearts, they remembered every bit of strength they had forged in unity. With fierce defiance, they shouted into the abyss, "We can rewrite the ending." They stood shoulder to shoulder again, hands intertwined, voices rising in a cacophony of rage and love. Their stories melted into one another, and as that sound lanced through the chaos, the shadows recoiled, shrieking, unable to withstand the power of their combined resolve. The ground pulsed underneath, rocketing up with blinding light, illuminating every crevice of darkness until the very fabric of the cavern began to tear apart. The air vibrated with energy, a surge of collective hope. They would not succumb again. They had faced their fears, woven their pain into something stronger. But as the light swirled and blossomed around them, the creature's laughter reached a fever pitch, echoing like thunder. "This isn't your story to write. You have already lost." The tension in the air thickened until it felt like a noose tightening around their necks. And then, in a sudden flash, reality splintered. The cavern cracked open wide, releasing gusts of chill that rippled through their bodies. They were no longer within the warm embrace of shared hope. Instead, they were cast into a nightmare, an endless expanse of gray fog and shadow where every moment held the promise of torment. They stood there, disoriented, scattered among the swirling mist that seemed to breathe and pulse like living creatures, encircling them with intent. What lay ahead was unknown, but the echoes of their stories lingered in their hearts, a reminder that they would face whatever emerged from the depths of despair. They took a gulping breath, ready to confront whatever darkness awaited in a landscape that felt alive with sinister possibilities, knowing that to prevail, they must not only fight the creature, but also the shadows of their own past. Together, they whispered, their voices uniting once more as they stepped into the suffocating embrace of the fog, determined to confront what lurked beyond the veil of their fears. The journey into the unknown had only just begun, and with every step, they felt the weight of destiny coiling tighter, as though the very ground beneath whispered secrets of despair and redemption waiting to unfold. As they stepped deeper into the fog, the temperature dropped sharply, each breath becoming visible in the chill air. The silence around them was heavy, punctuated only by the soft crunch of their footsteps on the uneven ground. The mist swirled as if it had a mind of its own, clinging to their skin, wrapping around them like cold fingers. Suddenly, they heard a distant sobbing, echoing through the gloom. It was a sound both haunting and beautiful, reverberating against the ethereal backdrop. The cries grew louder, more desperate, and seemed to be calling out to them, pulling at something deep within. The group exchanged uneasy glances. It was a melody that spoke of sorrow, enticing yet alarming, and the urge to investigate compelled them onward. Each step felt heavier, as if the air itself was growing denser, resisting their movement. "Do you hear that?" one whispered, breaking the silence like glass shattering. As they moved, the fog shifted suddenly, revealing faint outlines of twisted branches, stark against the gray. The trees stood like silent sentinels, their gnarled limbs clawing at the sky. But something was off. The trees seemed to pulse, their bark rippling like skin. The echoes of the sobs grew louder, reflecting in the bark as if the very trees were weeping. "Let's go back," another urged, their voice tremulous. Before anyone could respond, a sudden chill coursed through the group, a bone-deep cold that made their teeth chatter. Out of the mist, shadows flickered, darting just beyond their vision, teasing them into thinking they were not alone. Suddenly, from around a twisted tree, a figure emerged, cloaked in tattered rags that flapped like wings in an unseen wind. Its face was obscured, but they could see a mouth stretched into an exaggerated grin, eyes impossibly wide and filled with deep, cavernous darkness. It pointed toward the ground, where a shallow grave lay half-hidden beneath the underbrush, the earth disturbed as though a recent struggle had taken place. "Help us," it rasped, words dripping with desperation. "We are trapped. The darkness wants our souls." Panic surged through the group. They wanted to flee, but something drew them closer, a compulsion to understand what this wretched being meant. It stepped closer, an animalistic desperation in its movements. "Join us. Break free from your bonds." A skeletal hand reached toward them, and the figure's grin widened, revealing teeth stained with decay. It began to sway rhythmically, the shadows around it swirling more violently, as if dancing to a sinister tune. The sobs intensified, blending with a low, grating chant that reverberated through the fog. "We are never free," the chorus echoed, voices overlapping, layering into a dissonant harmony that dug deep into their minds, stirring long-buried fears and regrets. The chants began to claw at their consciousness, urging them to remember things they had tried to forget, moments heavy with guilt, faces of those they had wronged, memories of lost chances that lit up the darkness with regret. In that moment, the ground beneath them shuddered violently, cracks snaking through the earth. Panic surged, and they stumbled backward, but the fog wrapped around their feet, turning to viscous sludge that dragged them downward. An overwhelming sense of dread washed over them, a reminder that there was no escape from the truths they feared. "Look," someone shouted, pointing to the grave, where skeletal hands began to push up from beneath the soil, clawing at the earth in a desperate bid for freedom. The figures emerging were the same faces they had seen in the shadows. Lost loved ones, eyes filled with despair. Desperation clawed at their hearts as those buried souls reached out with skeletal hands, whispering words soaked in sorrow. "Help us! Release us!" They cried in unison, voices warping into a haunting symphony. Overwhelmed, they turned to flee, but the fog thickened, and the trees began to twist and bend in unnatural angles, blocking their path. Shadows loomed larger now, moving independently, reaching out with unseen fingers, curling around legs and arms. The whispers rose to a fever pitch, a cacophony of despair that echoed around them, mingling with the gurgled cries and howls. "Stay with us," the figure growled, its grin somehow widening more amidst the horror, revealing a gaping maw full of jagged teeth. "You cannot leave until you embrace the pain." Suddenly, as if in response to their fear, the shadows erupted, lashing out in frantic waves, sweeping past in tears and laughter, chaotic and dissonant. One of them stumbled back and fell to the ground, and in that instant something flickered in the air, a moment of silence. They gathered around, breathing heavily, dread pooling in the pit of their stomachs. Each stared into the encroaching dark, which felt alive with menace. But before they could regroup, the mist thickened again, and the ground heaved violently, almost sending them sprawling. They were caught in some terrifying illusion, a twisted play that challenged their very sanity. Shadows slithered like angry serpents, drawing nearer, writhing and beckoning them to succumb, somehow promising freedom wrapped in acceptance of their failure. They felt engulfed by a force that demanded surrender, a promise of peace that made their hearts race. Surrendering to something dark seemed easier than fighting. "Fight! You can fight it!" one of them shouted suddenly, desperation ringing clear. They all hesitated, bonds of fear resting at their feet, urging them to stay, to not resist. But the reminder of their struggle together broke through their paralysis. With renewed courage, they joined hands once more, forging a chain against the vortex swirling around them. Together, they began to chant their own declarations of resistance, voices rising high over the tumult. "We will not be taken," they cried into the storm, their words slicing through the cloying fog, shards of light piercing the heavy darkness. The shadows recoiled, hissing in fury as if scorched by their resolve. They surged toward the source of the cries, and the ground shook again, a deep rumble resonating through the very bones of the earth as the wildfire of their collective anger illuminated the way. And suddenly, a crack appeared in the fog. Light broke through, spilling across the ground like liquid fire, burning away the mists. They turned to the fleeing darkness, rising stronger against the hollow pleas echoing around them. But just as hope flared anew, the powerful presence of the creature coalesced, swirling in the chaos, words twisted into a delightful malice. "You can't escape yourselves," it roared, the voices of the trapped merging with sinister delight. "This place feeds on your regrets. You will never sever your bond to me." Their surroundings distorted again, morphing into scenes of their worst memories. Each face, each moment a dagger to their hearts. The cacophony of whispers grew frantic, boiling with intent. Shadows surged back, grasping at their minds, wrapping around them like a noose tightening with every heartbeat. From somewhere in the depths, drenched in anguish, they caught glimpses of familiar faces among the shadows, figures they thought long lost. Hands reaching out, mouths pleading, mingling with the grotesque shapes of the creature. The depths of despair began closing in as those they cherished began to flicker, becoming twisted beings of shadow and grief, eager to claim them. "Don't listen," one yelled, desperation edging their words. "We can't give in." Yet the more they resisted, the louder the cacophony grew, their screams blending into a single, piercing note of hopelessness that echoed across the landscape. Shadows took form, coiling around them in an intricate dance of despair, as tendrils of darkness attempted to pry them apart, luring each into the depths where pain waited in swirling mist. Chaos erupted as shadows closed in from all sides, seizing one of their own, pulling him screaming into the void before anyone could react. The rest recoiled in horror, fear overwhelming them. Panic spread like wildfire, spiraling into a suffocating storm, the air thick with despair. "Stay together," they rallied, but the shadows continued to writhe maddeningly, seeking to devour every spark of hope, every flicker of light. Surrounded, they pressed closer, willing their combined essence against the feasting darkness. Memories still tore at their resolve, and before them sprawled a horrifying tableau of everything they had lost, shadows weaving a tapestry of their past failures. One by one, shadows emerged from the darkness, twisted reflections of themselves, their hopes warped, drenched in pain and anguish. "Join us," they murmured in honeyed tones. "Let us pull you into the depths. Embrace who you are. Your suffering is a part of you. Allow us into your hearts, and we can set you free." And as the voices rose around them in a fog of despair, one of the shadows lunged, clawing at the fabric of reality, attempting to breach the connection they had forged. But deep within, something stirred. Their thoughts collided in defiance, fighting through the cries of the shadows. Together, they could ignite one last stand, one final push against the overwhelming tide. It felt surreal, the air humming with energy as their voices resonated loud. "We choose our own path," they shouted together. "You do not define us. We will not succumb to your darkness." The shadows shrieked in despair, recoiling as if burnt. The ground trembled violently, and for a moment, the air shimmered with light, a brief crack in the encroaching void, spilling illumination into the night. But darkness fought back, roaring with rage as it lashed out. Another member of the group was pulled beneath the surface, swallowed whole, their cries echoing long after they disappeared. In a frantic dance, they realized what they had to do. They couldn't wait. The pull of the shadows needed to be broken, or one by one, they would be lost into the depths forever. They weren't merely facing an external force, but the inner shadows of their own minds, an inescapable truth. They had to confront not just the horror surrounding them, but the demons within. Only then could they hope to awaken from the nightmare that sought to consume them whole. Through the swirling shadows that weaved in and out of presence, they felt a bond stronger than fear, memories surging forth. Every moment they had fought together, every struggle wrapped in laughter, the endless journey through pain into the light. And deep within, they knew they could not break their chains alone. Together, someone shouted, reaching outward, fingers intertwined, voices rising in a fierce crescendo. We are stronger together. We are not just grief and regret. The figures around them flickered uncertainly, the shadows wavering as their chant clawed through the choking fog. In that moment, the air grew electric, surging with energy, pulling them into a maddening spiral. It felt like standing on the edge of an abyss, drawing on the memories that stirred their hearts and ignited their souls. But the shadows shifted again, lurking just beyond, teasing and clawing at their minds, whispering insidious truths that burrowed deep. You will never escape. Yet they pressed forward together. As the shadows roared and coiled around them, clinging to their doubts, they hurled their combined memories back at the darkness. The laughter, the love, the moments they had shared in companionship. The shadows writhed violently, twisting and turning, the cacophony echoing back at them, a storm of uncertainty rising anew. And just as hope threatened to flicker, as memories swirled with agony, a beam of light pierced through the fog, illuminating their faces. They felt the warmth on their skin, a reminder of all they fought for, and as if the light answered their call, it surged through the darkness. Embrace the light. We are brighter than our shadows, they cried, the energy blossoming between them. The shadows surged forward in a final frenzy, shrieks of rage piercing the silence before them. They could feel the weight of grief and loss pressing against them, but the bond they had forged became a shield, a wall against the encroaching darkness. And as the light expanded, illuminating everything in its path, they saw the shadows dissolve, the figure behind their torment flickering wildly. In that moment of connection, they felt something shift. A rush of hope surged through them, a warm glow pushing back the tendrils of despair, fueling their resolve. Yet from the writhing mass of shadows emerged one last haunting figure, embodying all their fears, whispering words that echoed around the cavern walls. You cannot escape yourselves, it sang, voice smooth as silk but drenched in malice. You are bound to me until the end. Remember, your struggles only tie you closer. You can never be free. And with those haunting words, a cacophony of chilling laughter erupted as the shadows closed in once more, swallowing the light, tugging away fragments of hope, and leaving a dark cavern of despair lingering in the silent spaces where their memories resided. But even as that darkness loomed large, the light within them sparked anew, a last flicker of defiance igniting in the shadowed expanse of their hearts. They would not give up. They could not drown in this horror. They would rise against it. They would rise against it, a flicker of rebellion igniting deep within. As the darkness clawed at their sanity, whispers seeped into their minds, setting every nerve on edge, breathing life into their hidden fears. Shadows shifted and coiled, elongating until they took on grotesque forms, mirroring the torment of their deepest insecurities. Suddenly, the ground beneath them shuddered, rumbling as if the earth itself was alive. Cracks spidered across the surface, each fissure exhaling a putrid scent that churned their stomachs. From the gaps, skeletal hands emerged, grasping and tugging, pulling them down into the abyss. The howling wind carried the echoes of lost souls pleading for release, the wails mingling with the agonizing laughter of the creature. One by one, "You will join us," the voice crooned, dripping with malice. Reality twisted as their surroundings morphed again, and they were flung into a hellish landscape, a nightmarish amalgamation of their guilt and regrets. They stood in a desolate town, enveloped in eternal twilight, where memories of laughter were engulfed by shadows, twisting and turning like smoke. Ghostly figures wandered aimlessly, trapped in a loop of sorrowful existence. They turned their hollow eyes towards the group, mouths moving soundlessly. Each apparition bore a resemblance to people they knew, all fractured versions of loved ones, faces distorted by grief and despair. One shadow stepped forward, features sharpening into a familiar face, their long-lost friend who had stumbled into darkness and never returned. "You left me," it hissed, eyes glinting with an eerie light. "You didn't save me." Grief like a heavy shroud descended upon them, stifling their breath. "No," they screamed in unison, but the bellowing winds smothered their cries, drowning them in despair. They felt tendrils of darkness delicate as silk wrap around their wrists, dragging them closer to the boy's haunting gaze. "Stay with us," it murmured, voice layered with layers of sorrow. "We can be together again." Shivers raced down their spines, a cold knot of dread tightening around their hearts. They struggled to break free, but the shadows only tightened their grip, whispering sweetly of acceptance and rest. "What's wrong with wanting to belong? You don't have to fight anymore. Just surrender." Before they could respond, the ground bucked violently, dragging them down even further. They were separated briefly, each tossed into nightmarish reflections of their own making. One found herself alone in a dark forest, where trees twisted grotesquely, their bark peeling away to expose dripping, raw flesh. Creeping fog swirled around her legs like a living thing, pulling her deeper into the woods. The air grew heavy with whispers, snippets of memories long locked away. Each step echoed with the pounding of her heartbeat, each pulse matching the dread that clawed at her throat. She could feel eyes watching, waiting, and every instinct screamed at her to flee. Then emerged a figure beside her, shifting ever closer. It wore her face, the grin wide and unnatural. "You left me behind, didn't you?" the shadow said in a twisted, sing-song voice. "Tell me what you can't bear to say. Tell me how you failed them." Terror gripped her heart as she opened her mouth to deny the accusations, but the words clung to her tongue, thick and bitter. The apparition stepped closer, eyes glimmering with a cruel light, feeding off her anguish. Heavy branches creaked overhead, and she felt the shadows whispering sweetly in her ear, urging her to let go, to drown in the darkness, inviting her deeper into the void. Farther away, another member of the group found themselves trapped within a crumbling building. The walls pulsed like they were alive, the air thick with an oppressive weight. Worn photographs adorned the peeling wallpaper, faces of friends and family, distorted and screaming in agony. Each picture radiated waves of sorrow, the images flickering like old film, replaying the happiest moments, now twisted into macabre parodies. As they stepped inside, the floorboards groaned beneath their weight, echoing with distant cries. Shadows danced at the edges of the room, emerging with malicious intent, pulling forth from the corners all the specters of pain that had visited them in silence. Each whisper sliced through the air, a combination of regret and hatred, and he felt the walls closing in, suffocating and dark. "Why did you leave?" a voice echoed from within the depths of the shadows. "You could have saved us." It was their sibling, a figure cloaked in darkness, agony radiating from every side. "You said you would always protect me." The shadows amplified their grief, the pain distorting into a powerful force. Despite the swirling darkness, a tiny spark ignited within him, begging him to resist. Yet still, The shadows pressed closer, threatening to engulf him in despair, each creak of the house resonating like a heartbeat against the silence. "Just give in?" The voice lured him in, tender and yet menacing. "Keep your eyes closed and you won't have to see us anymore. You can live in the dark. Join us, and we will never separate again." With each passing moment, the atmosphere thickened, coiling like a snake, squeezing every ounce of hope from their hearts. "No," he screamed, ready to lash out against the figure. But just as he reached for it, it flickered out of existence, vanishing into the shadows, leaving him with only the echoes of unfulfilled promises. The group fought against the tide, hearts pounding defiantly, echoing with screams of denial that ricocheted throughout the suffocating darkness. They struggled to stay tethered, realizing they had to break the shared bonds of grief. Each disruption in their connection shuddered through the shadows, a wave of light flickering upon the precipice of despair. Together, they met in the fractured light, their struggle against the impending doom growing stronger. With every flicker of hope, they felt the shadows begin to retreat. But the creature's presence surged anew, a swirling mass of rage and despair. Sensing their resolve, it lashed out with fury, determined to reclaim its power. "Your pain belongs to me," its voice roared, echoing through the shifting landscape. "You cannot. Sever the ties that bind you to your grief. Embrace your darkness or perish." And with one final breath, the group joined once more, voices intertwining, drawing on the fierce bond that flickered like a flame against the night. "Together, we choose hope," they cried in unison, the words cascading through the storm, slashing through the shadows. A bright surge of energy radiated outward, catching the creature momentarily off guard. The darkness shrieked as it recoiled, shadows dissipating in the radiant light. But as quickly as it faltered, the creature descended upon them again, fury tempered by the sights of their unity. What came next twisted into true horror, a cataclysm of screams and visions blurring as the ground began to fracture beneath their feet. All around, memories erupted. They were yanked from the present, thrown into scenes of chaos and destruction. Reality warped and cracked, revealing a nightmarish world collapsing into itself. Endless refractions of terror rippled through their minds as echoes of laughter turned into agonizing cries. They realized with horror that to fight against this entity meant facing their deepest fears, and those fears were hungry. The shadows wrapped around their ankles, drawing them closer to a sickening sense of inevitability. They couldn't escape unless they confronted what they had buried deep within. As night fell upon the landscape, swallowing the last remnants of light, they found themselves in a nightmarish purgatory, no longer mere reflections of their past, but haunting figures of their own making. They looked at each other, uncertainty brewing as the realization gnawed at their hearts. Would they yield to the terror and succumb to the darkness, or fight back with every ounce of resolve left in their bodies? The choice faltered on the edge of their minds. Each hesitated, the weight of despair flooding back in waves, the shadows growing thicker, wrapping around their thoughts like suffocating vines. Gritting their teeth, they steadied themselves, knowing that nothing could be worse than the fate waiting in the dark, the specters clawing at their souls. With their resolve steeled, they plunged into a void of shadows, ready to face their past and open the door that led to the terrifying truth. The walls of darkness shuddered in anticipation. The reckoning was near. The group took a collective breath, their hearts pounding, and together they lunged into the endless depth where darkness and memories intertwined, bracing for the storm that awaited them. Their hearts raced as they sank deeper into the suffocating shadows, the air turning colder, thicker with regret and despair. Each step echoed against the walls of the abyss, the sound distorted, mocking them with bitter laughter. Strange shapes writhed underfoot, half-formed memories bubbling to the surface, twisted by the darkness. They caught glimpses of altered moments, loved ones staring blankly as if their souls were snatched away, eyes wide with terror. With every heartbeat, the shadows wrapped tighter around their legs, urging them toward the darkness that hung like a shroud. Suddenly, a low growl rippled through the air, causing them to freeze in place. The sound pulsed like a heartbeat in the silence, growing louder, more insistent, as if the void itself were alive. Shadows coalesced in front of them, forming a grotesque figure that loomed larger with each passing second. Its eyes glinted like sharp blades, hungry, searching for their fear. "No," they whispered, the word barely escaping their lips as a thick, choking fog seeped into every crevice. The creature leaned closer, its breath stinking of decay and despair, wrapping around them like a noose. In that stifling moment, they felt the weight of every regret, every shadowed hint of guilt rising to the surface, clawing at their minds, threatening to drown them. One of the group stumbled back, tripping over hidden roots that seemed to reach for them, grasping and clawing, pulling them into the darkness. "We need to go. Now," they shouted, but the noise only fueled the growling, which deepened into a guttural rumble that vibrated through the ground, causing their bones to rattle. The shadows laughed, a wicked, echoing sound that filled the air with a tangible chill. Whispers spiraled around them, words lost in the shrieking wind. "You cannot escape your past," they taunted, voices merging into a cacophony of distorted familiarity. "You are ours. You belong here." A flash of movement caught their eye as ghostly figures flickered at the edge of the darkness. Familiar faces, friends, family. They stood there watching with hollow gazes, each mired in an eternal loop of their own torment. Branches clawed at the sky, twisted like broken fingers as the figures' mouths stretched open, frozen in screams that never left their throats. It was unnerving, the way their eyes seemed to plead for help, yet despair clung to them like a wet shroud. The air heated with a palpable tension, thickening, wrapping around the group, filling their lungs with despair. They could feel the walls of reality trembling, shifting like a breathing entity. "Stop looking at them. They are not real," one shouted, though her voice was shaky, uncertainty laced in her desperate words. "They're just shadows of what we fear." Yet doubt seeped into her heart, pulling her deeper into the turmoil of emotions swirling within her. In that chaotic junction of reality and nightmare, the creature unveiled its maw, a gaping void lined with jagged teeth glistening with obsidian-like sheen. "You will join them," it hissed, the sound guttural, vibrating in their bones. "Your pain, your darkness, they only make me stronger." Suddenly, the ground beneath fractured, deep fissures opening like the wounds of some ancient beast stirring from slumber. One of them lost their footing and slipped into the abyss, their screams swallowed by the darkness. The others instinctively lunged to grasp his hand, but the shadows yanked him down, pulling him deeper into the malevolent depths, provoking a primal fear that clawed at all their hearts. "What do we do? What do we do?" Someone cried out, panic rising like bile in their throats as the shadows closed in, thickening the air with a swirling, malevolent energy. The creature hissed, feeding off their dread, each pulse of fear making it grow larger, more grotesque. The silhouettes of twisted memories loomed closer, their faces now merging, becoming unrecognizable. They emitted a chilling harmony of sobs and laughter that sent shivers coursing through their spines. The ground shook violently once more, throwing them against one another, forcing them to regroup in the overwhelming quagmire of shadows surrounding them. They could feel their sanity wavering, pulled taut by the darkness that lurked at the edges of their minds. An inexplicable urge tugged at their thoughts to give in, to sink into the soft embrace of despair. "They're waiting," the shadowy figures murmured, their voices a symphony of anguish. "The more you fight, the more they suffer." And then came an opportunity as the shadows parted momentarily, revealing a flickering light in the distance, a small glimmer of hope in the consuming darkness. "We have to reach it," someone shouted, desperately pointing toward the light. They gathered what remained of their strength, scrambling forward. But with every step closer, the shadows hissed and writhed, launching tendrils toward them like vipers striking, trying to drag them back. As they surged ahead, the darkness lashed out, clawing at their skin, leaving trails of icy scars that burned with every wound. The figures recoiled, but the light pulsed invitingly, growing brighter with each desperate attempt to break through the shadows. But just as they thought they could breach the barrier, a blinding shadow shot forward, coiling around their ankles, yanking them down as the familiar faces opened their mouths wider, shrieking in frozen horror. The creature's laughter echoed, drowning out their cries for help, resonating within the very marrow of their bones. "You belong to the night. Your souls linger here," it growled, its voice a storm of thunder rumbling through the dark. Struggling against the weight of the shadows, they felt their grip on reality slipping. But buried beneath the heavy blanket of fear, a flicker of memories ignited within them, ties to joy, laughter, and love. They saw snippets of shared moments, when they were whole, unbroken. "No," they roared, fists clenched as they drew strength from each other, the bond they shared igniting a blaze that began to push back against the consuming shadows. "Together," they shouted, voices rising to drown out the crushing noise of despair. "We can fight this." It was through that unified scream that they pushed against the wave of darkness, emboldened by the light that fought through, shimmering with the warmth of hope. The shadows writhed as if stung by a great force, recoiling from the collective power of their resolve. But the creature thrashed in fury, its form twisting and expanding, trying to regain control as it spewed forth echoes of anguish from their past, trying to weaken their newfound strength. "You think you can escape?" it screeched, disrupted by their defiance, its anger palpable. "You cannot flee from who you really are." With renewed determination, they surged toward the light, forcing their way through the tumultuous shadows. They could feel the presence of their lost friend pulling them back, the unhealthy longing clawing at their resolve. But they held on, anchored by the strength surging within them, the flickering light further solidifying their will to escape this wretched curse. Finally, as they broke through the veil of darkness, the world exploded into a symphony of color and warmth that had been lost to the shadows. They tumbled into a swirling vortex, a whirlwind of sensation that redefined their understanding of hope. The creature's howl of rage echoed behind them, but every step forward illuminated their path, clearing the remnants of despair. Fluid motion surrounded them, each heartbeat reinvigorating their spirits, a rush of what it meant to be alive, to choose joy over the despair that had clutched so tightly. But they knew, deep down, the shadows were not far behind. As reality gradually reshaped itself around them, they turned once more to witness the dark entity. It loomed in the distance, a whisper of malevolence, vowing to haunt their every moment, lurking in the corners of their minds. Its final howl echoed like a reminder of what they had escaped, yet knew they could never truly forget. For inside them, each carried a piece of that darkness. They wouldn't escape easily. The shadows had a way of coming back, clawing at the edges of their sanity, testing what they had built together. They would need to remain vigilant, forever holding their light, ready to confront whatever unholy terror awaited them in the depths of their own fears. As they stumbled into the vibrant light, the world morphed around them, flickering like a dying bulb. But they knew that this was only the surface. Behind the brightness, a suffocating darkness lurked, watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. It felt as if the sun itself were a fragile veil stretched too thin, ready to tear apart and reveal the abyss once more. The group leaned together, panting, heartbeats synchronized in a frantic rhythm. They exchanged worried glances, the air thick with an electric tension that slipped into silence. Shadows flicked at the corners of their vision, darting just out of reach. Each time they looked, hoping for familiarity, they found only emptiness. "Did we really get away?" one asked, peering over her shoulder, dread pooling in her stomach. The tall grass rippled as if something was moving beneath. Before anyone could answer, the air grew dense and icy around them. It clawed at their skin like 1,000 tiny fingers, whispering threats, chilling them to the bone. Suddenly, a shriek pierced the silence, a sound both familiar and alien, reverberating in their minds until it became a cacophony of their own thoughts, twisting and warping their memories. "Please no," another shouted, doubling over as the sound filtered through their consciousness. It was as if the shadows were picking apart their lives, extracting the worst moments, feeding on their fear and despair. Visions of past failures and regrets spilled forth, blurring the line between what was real and what was only a reflection of their inner demons. They crouched low, instinctively shielding themselves from the onslaught, but the darkness coiled closer. It lunged at them, a writhing mass of despair that seemed to pulse and breathe. Each breath it took pulled them deeper into their own terror, wrapping around their throats like a vice. "It's coming for us," one of them shouted, panic rising like a tide. In a split second, the light flickered, stuttered, and vanished. They were plunged into pitch blackness, the nothingness swallowing them whole. Only the sound of labored breath filled the void. They fumbled for each other, hands slipping in confusion. No longer could they tell who was who, enveloped in this insidious nightmare disguised as reality. A choking whisper slithered through the air like a serpent. You wanted to forget. You wanted to escape. Each word dripped with malice, curling around them like smoke. The voice was everywhere and nowhere, resonating within the very walls of their minds. Shadowy figures danced at the frayed edges of their thoughts, mocking, teasing, their features ever shifting, too twisted to recognize. Then, without warning, the ground heaved violently beneath them. They stumbled and fell, the grass turning to mud, gripping their ankles like 1,000 hands pulling them down. It felt alive, aware of their fear and relishing in the chaos. They clawed at the soil, desperately searching for purchase, but the darkness clawed back, ensnaring them as laughter echoed, the same haunting voice now taunting them. "Believe you can escape? Watch as I strip away your reality piece by piece." It cackled, the sound intertwining with the howling wind. The landscape shifted, trees bending like skeletal fingers in agony, wailing in the sorrowful chorus of lost souls. Branches twisted together, forming grotesque faces that twisted in pain and torment. Each face seemed to whisper their names, calling out in despair, luring them deeper into the murk. They scrambled to make sense of their surroundings, but the earth around them warped and morphed, revealing a path lined with gravestones, moss creeping up their sides like fingers curling in around forgotten memories. Names they recognized, friends, family, each carving etching deeper into their souls, hunted by the specters of doubt. The stones seemed to tremble with unspoken words, the wind carrying the hushed tones of long-lost voices like echoes of the past. "Keep moving," one shouted, pulling them forward, but each step became heavier, as if they were wading through the grief of those lost to the sinister entity. Their hearts seized with the realization that it was feeding on their mounting dread, growing stronger with each passing moment. Panic spread like wildfire among them, but they pressed on, determined to escape the suffocating grip of despair. Ahead, a flickering glow appeared, weak like a candle's flame shivering in the wind. It beckoned them, promising safety, but with each step closer, they could feel the shadows lurch forward, desperate to reclaim their quarry. The darkness crackled around them, forming waves that crashed against their willpower, threatening to pull them away. As they approached the light, the laughter grew louder, more menacing, echoing as if the world itself were mocking them. "You think you can reach the light? You think you've escaped?" This time, fear stretched its icy fingers around their hearts, squeezing until they gasped for breath. But still, they pressed forward. Hope surged in their veins like fire. They gritted their teeth, determined to shatter the mirror of despair, reflecting their worst fears. As they crossed the threshold into the glow, the ground cracked and a chasm yawned beneath them, swallowing the darkness whole. Yet, even in the light, shadows lingered at the fringes, whispering dark promises, creeping closer with insatiable hunger. From the crack in the earth emerged tendrils of darkness, lapping hungrily at the edges of their sanity, grazing their skin like sinful caresses. "Stay strong. Don't let them in," one yelled, fear and desperation lacing their voice. They tightened their formation, willing the light to expand, pushing against the encroaching dread that sought to suffocate them. The pinpricks of darkness throbbed, shredding their resolve, attempting to entwine with their minds, searching for the cracks where shadows could infiltrate. But then, the ground trembled again, this time foreboding, and the warmth of light flickered ominously. The tendrils pulled back, swirling like smoke, revealing a vast, empty realm of a world they could not recognize. The sky loomed above, darkened by roiling clouds, swirling with a malevolence that sent fresh waves of anxiety coursing through them. Each breath felt like a guilty pleasure, a sin against the oppressive weight around them. From the abyss below, they heard faint echoes, shadows merging with the wind to form chilling whispers that chilled them to the bone. "You'll never escape your fate, children." The voice simplified, growing distorted, morphing into something far more sinister. "Your past won't let you go." They fought against this new wave of despair that washed over them. But every attempt to fend it off only deepened the shadows, carving away at their resolve. It became harder to discern friend from foe, reality from nightmare. They stood on a precipice, the light behind them flickering like the final breath of a dying star. "Keep moving. Focus," someone cried out, their voice breaking, fear pumping through their words. "The shadows can't consume us if we don't let them." They gathered what remained of their strength and pressed on, defying the whispers that sought to ensnare them in their dark embrace. But the shadows surged once more, intertwining around them, tugging at the corners of their minds, threatening to unearth their deepest fears. Faces emerged from the blackness, familiar yet twisted, mouths stretching into cruel smiles. "Join us," they beckoned. Freedom awaits in surrender. Panic thrummed in their veins. They could feel the weight of despair pressing down on them, trying to draw them closer to the endless abyss. But within that darkness flickered another light. Their collective bond, a grasp at hope infused with fiery determination. Side by side, they pushed against the rivulets of despair that slithered towards them, drawing strength from each other, unwilling to let go. Yet, they knew deep down that the peace they sought was a fragile illusion, a facade hiding the chaos that would surely follow. With a final surge, they broke through the clutches of shadows and rushed toward the flickering glow, praying it would guide them away from the maw of the darkness that had sought to ensnare them. But with every passing moment, that hope felt increasingly precarious, as they bore witness to the shadowy figures melting into the floor, weaving ever closer behind them, their whispers becoming a relentless suffocation of doubt filling the air. In the distance, the light pulsed like a heart, lighter with each step, but the shadows released one last band, snaking towards them, desperate to reel them back into an abyss that stretched infinitely wider. Just as they thought the light was within reach, the ground beneath them splintered, sending them into free fall. Its bottomless depths beckoned as they plummeted into darkness, the cocoon of light dissipating above them, leaving only chilling laughter and the haunting whispers of the damned behind. As they fell, the shadows coiled tighter around them, dragging them into a chilling void where time seemed to stretch and warp. For an instant, everything was quiet, but the silence was deceptive. It was a prelude to the chaos brewing just out of sight. Then, without warning, they hit the ground hard, tumbling into a twisted landscape that felt alive with malevolence. Barren trees loomed like skeletal hands reaching for the sky, their branches clawing at the air as if trying to escape their own tortured existence. The ground was wet and slippery, the mud beneath their fingers cold and clammy, sapping their warmth. "Get up! We have to move!" someone shouted, their voice a lifeline amidst the chaos. But as they scrambled to their feet, they felt something shift in the darkness around them, an unsettling awareness, a presence lurking just out of sight. The air grew thick with a rancid stench, something decaying and long forgotten. Suddenly, a low growl echoed from the trees, deep and guttural, reverberating through their bones. They turned, hearts racing, eyes darting in every direction. Ahead, something stirred, an indistinct shape barely visible in the shadows. It shifted, its form flickering like an old film, never quite settling into focus. The fear was palpable, a living thing curling around their throats. But they couldn't just stand there. They moved as one, forging ahead, though each step felt like a descent into hell itself. The ground squelched beneath them, and with every footfall, they could hear whispers rising from the earth, names and screams, lost memories that clawed at their consciousness. "Help me," a voice cried softly, sending chills racing down their spines. It was a plea that clawed its way into their hearts, blurring the line between truth and trickery. Branches snapped around them, echoing the sound of teeth grinding. Each crack a warning, each snap a reminder of the danger lurking so close. They veered off the path, their instincts kicking in, leading them deeper into the suffocating fog that enveloped them. But the growls persisted, closer now, accompanied by the shuffling of something large and unseen. "Keep going. It can't be that far," one murmured, though their voice trembled with uncertainty. The sound of paws scratching against the dead leaves echoed behind them, heavy and relentless. They stumbled forward, adrenaline flooding their veins, hearts pounding in a frantic symphony of survival. They could just make out a glimmer of light in the distance, but with each passing moment, it felt farther away. The shadows were closing in, hungry and eager, wrapping around their ankles like a creeping fog. As they pushed forward, they heard a loud thud, something large crashing through the underbrush, followed by that guttural growl. Again, now punctuated by a sharp hiss that echoed through the dark like a warning bell. A flash of movement caught their eye, a dark shape darting between the trees, too fast to identify. The growl grew louder, morphing into a shriek, and the realization hit them. Whatever was chasing them was toying with its prey. It wanted them frantic, filled with despair, a thrill that pulsed through the very air around them. Panic washed over them, the realization that they were merely prey in this twisted game. "This way," someone shouted again, grasping for courage, but uncertainty gnawed at their insides. The direction was wrong. It felt wrong, but still, they moved, pushed on by the primal instinct to flee, to escape the shadowed claws that raked at their backs. The underbrush whispered secrets, secrets not meant for mortal ears. They could almost hear the shadows speaking, taunting them. "You can't run forever," one hissed, as the mud squelched beneath their feet, grabbing them as if pleading for closer company. They were sinking into their own fears, and it was becoming harder to breathe, harder to think. They rounded a bend, heart racing, and stumbled into a small clearing, the light overhead flickering like a dying candle. The air was heavier here, suffocating, impenetrable. The trees loomed like dark towers, blocking out any hope of escape. In this grim arena, the darkness was thicker, more tangible, pressing down on them, reminding them of their isolation. Up ahead, the glimmer of light pulsed in time with their heartbeat, flickering out of reach. "Not again," another voice shrieked, filled with despair, as the growl erupted into a crescendo. The dark shape materialized, no longer a blur. It took form, a large, twisted creature with glowing eyes fixed on them like a predator watching its prey. Its limbs were elongating, claw-like fingers stretching out from dark, matted fur, and its maw split in a grin that exposed rows of jagged teeth. They gasped collectively, stumbling back, but found no purchase. The world around them spun like a fever dream, shadows twisting and turning, blurring the boundaries of their perception. They backed deeper into the clearing, crowding into each other for comfort, for strength, but the warmth they craved felt miles away. Just then, the creature lunged, its movement fluid, hypnotic, as though it were dancing through the air. They scuttled side to side, desperately seeking escape, but the path behind them had vanished. lost beneath tendrils of fog that curled and flicked like faded fingers. Panic spiraled, and in their hesitation, the creature let out a bone-chilling, growing roar that pierced through the suffocating fog, reverberating within their chests, binding them in place. Finally, with a burst of adrenaline, they turned and fled toward the flickering light, praying that it would lead them to safety. Each heartbeat echoed like a drum against the oppressive silence, but they ran faster, their feet barely touching the ground, the creature's breath hot against their necks. They could almost feel its claws upon their skin. A tickle of fear whispered through every nerve ending, as if they were being drawn back into an inky abyss. As they neared the light, it suddenly brightened, illuminating a figure standing in the center, a shadowy silhouette obscured by the intensity of the glow pouring from above. "Come closer," it beckoned, voice smooth yet laced with an eerie undertone that felt unsettlingly familiar. The figure extended a hand, urging them forward, inviting them into the warmth of light, a promise of safety. But somewhere deep inside, doubt crept in. They exchanged wary glances, hearts pounding in sync, trying to gauge the authenticity of this glowing figure. Was it a friend, or another trap spun by the shadows that sought to ensnare them in their dark web? "Don't believe it," one voiced out suddenly, hand held out to stop the others. The words barely echoed before shadows wriggled and danced at the edge of the light, whispering sweet lies that twisted their minds. The figure shifted slightly, and for a moment, the light grew dimmer, revealing marred features that were almost recognizable. The shadows began to merge with the figure, like smoke enveloping a flame, hungry for their confusion and fear. And in that moment of hesitation, the creature released a deafening roar, its eyes feral, fixated on their group as it unleashed another wave of darkness that washed over the clearing. The last vestige of warmth evaporated, replaced by a suffocating chill that wrapped around them like a shroud, and they found themselves paralyzed, caught between choices that threatened to consume them whole. Caught in the balance, their hearts hammered in their chests like desperate drumbeats. The shadows pulsed, a rhythm of terror that echoed in sync with the feral creature slowly slinking closer. It was a predator assessing its prey, relishing the fear that dripped from their every pore. The figure in the light beckoned again, gestures wide and inviting, but a cold sweat trickled down their backs. Something felt off, unnatural. As they strained to peer into the intense glow, distorted features twisted with malice began to emerge, flickering like a broken animation. What was just a moment ago a sanctuary now transformed into a sinister expansion of the dark creature's lair. "Step into the light," the voice urged, but there was an edge to it, an unnatural sweetness that sent shivers spiraling down their spines. The shadows danced around the figure, wrapping it in flourishes of darkness that flickered like dying embers. Guttural whispers filled the air, taunting them with echoes of doubt and despair. One of them, a young man with wild eyes, took a cautious step forward. James felt drawn to the glow, as if it were a siren call. "Maybe it can help us," he murmured, hope lacing his voice, though it wavered as he spoke. The others exchanged frantic glances, worry etched on their faces. The air throbbed, heavy with an anticipation that suffocated all possibility of reason. "Don't!" A resolute shout broke through the haze, coming from Sarah, who stood rigid. "We can't trust it. It's manipulating us. There's something wrong." Her voice cut through the tension, igniting a flicker of common sense, a tether to reality that grounded them just a moment longer. The creature snarled, revealing rows of teeth that glistened with an oily sheen under the dim light, its growl growing deeper, resonating in the depths of the earth. It surged forward, shadows lengthening, eager to snatch them from their fragile grasp on sanity. In that moment of hesitation, the light flickered dangerously, as if debating whether to protect them or to lure them into its grasp. An icy gust of wind swept through the clearing, extinguishing the heat of the moment, and suddenly, it felt like the shadows themselves had teeth. The figure in the light distorted, its voice warping into something mocking and cruel. "You think you can escape the darkness? You're already ours. Desperation took hold, and James tore his gaze from the figure, back toward the mass of blackness that lurked just beyond the edge of light. "We need to run," he shouted, fear igniting a primal instinct within him. The creature stepped back momentarily, its instinct battling with the hunt, but it didn't break away. It remained, a malevolent silhouette waiting for the right moment to strike. With renewed resolve, the group turned, racing deeper into the murky woods, their feet pounding against the ground as they broke free from the suffocating grip of indecision. The whispering shadows clawed at them, wrapping around their ankles like creeping vines, desperately trying to drag them back. A low hiss, their breath caught in their chests as a massive form lunged through the underbrush, ready to ensnare them. Branches snapped like brittle bones, echoing their frantic passage as they ducked and dodged the trees. They felt eyes upon them, countless unseen watchers lurking just beyond the swell of darkness. Each heartbeat seemed to resonate, a countdown leading to something dreadful. Suddenly, Sarah stumbled, her foot caught in a hidden snare of roots. "Help me!" she cried out, arms flailing as she fought to free herself, panic washing over her face. The others hesitated, torn between the urge to save her and the instinct to flee from the growing threat looming behind. "Leave her! We can't stop!" A voice broke the air, but James couldn't just abandon her. Driven by an inner turmoil, he lunged back, hands grasping at the entwinement of roots that held her tight. The darkness shifted around them, a vortex of whispers urging him to let go. "Just a moment," he shouted, even as the shadows writhed in response, seeking to invade his mind. He yanked harder, feeling the roots hold slacken momentarily. Sarah gasped, yanking her foot free, and with a determined grip, they pulled her to her feet, shoving forward as terror edged closer. But the dark shape wasn't finished. It surged forward, its growl reverberating through the air, a malicious excitement dancing around it. As they ran, the creature unleashed a deafening roar that split the air, a howl of frustration and hunger. They could feel its breath, hot and rancid, on their backs, a chilling reminder of their shared fate. "Over here!" James yelled, spotting a narrow gap between two towering trees ahead. They dashed toward it, the shadows chasing hard, a wall of darkness threatening to swallow them whole. The moonlight painted fleeting patterns on the ground, showing glimpses of their escape. But behind them, the creature surged forward, relentless. Just as they slipped between the trees, the ground gave beneath them, a hidden pit opening wide like a maw eager to consume. They stumbled forward, nearly falling as they barely grasped the edges, clawing their way back into the darkness, still fast at their heels. "Move!" Sarah urged, pushing past them before they could register the shock of the fall. They scrambled to pull themselves from the gaping abyss, heart pounding as they fought for grip. But as they clambered back to solid ground, it was clear they weren't safe yet, not even close. As they regained their footing, the air thickened again, the shadows around them writhing in excitement. A low chittering sound emerged, slowly building into screams that rattled their bones. From the darkness, countless shapes began to emerge, with eerie, glowing eyes that watched hungrily. Not just one, James gasped, realizing with dawning horror that they were surrounded. With a sudden flicker, the light they had chased before sent out uncertain beams, illuminating grotesque figures rising from the soil, their faces twisted in glee, mouths opening wider than should be possible. The whispers grew louder, an overwhelming cacophony drowning out reason, urging them deeper into madness. "Run! There's no time!" Sarah screamed, and they sprang into action once more, groping through the mass of bodies, their hearts urging them faster. The ground beneath them felt alive, pulling, tugging, each step an effort against forces beyond their understanding. As they dashed through the maze of darkness, a scalding heat began to rise, the shadows flickering like a candle about to extinguish. They felt the presence of something far worse behind them, a pulsating entity growing ever closer, unleashing a new wave of malevolence that sought to ensnare them. It was as if the darkness itself had become sentient, and it wanted them. "Stay together," James yelled. But even as he said the words, their numbers began to dwindle. One by one, the group fell behind, swallowed by the insatiable darkness. Each face that slipped away wore a mask of terror, helpless screams echoing in the wind, blending into the cacophony of whispers that surrounded them. No longer a frantic race against the darkness. It was a desperate struggle to cling to hope when all seemed lost. But James pressed on, adrenaline coursing through his veins as the glimmer of light in the distance beckoned him forward. With the force of grief and loss propelling him, he hurtled outward, not knowing if he would find safety or plunge deeper into the abyss. Time warped again, and as he neared the light, it burst through the trees, blinding him momentarily. But the shouts of terror lingered in his ears as he squinted, and for a heartbeat, everything froze, poised before the brink of revelation. What awaited him beyond this threshold? Would he find sanctuary, or another haunting truth waiting to coil around him, dragging him beneath the waves of despair like his friends, consumed by the very darkness they were fleeing? His vision cleared, and when he stepped into the light, he felt a surge of hope rush through him, but it quickly turned to ice. What lay before him was not a refuge, but a decaying clearing twisted by time. Gnarled roots snaked through the ground like skeletal fingers grasping at nothing. The trees stood as ancient sentinels, their branches intertwining above in a web that blocked out the moonlight. A thick mist rolled over the ground, coiling like a living thing, and whispering secrets he didn't want to know. The light pulsed, almost as if it was alive, bouncing off the trees and illuminating shapes that moved just out of sight. He felt the shadows creep closer, closing in around him like a vice. James turned quickly, feeling an empty pit open in his stomach as he realized he was alone. His heart raced, pounding against his rib cage as he scanned the tree line. The whispers grew louder, slithering into his ears like icy tendrils. It was then that he saw them, the twisted faces lurking just beyond the shadows. They watched him with hollow, sunken eyes, their mouths contorted into sinister grins that split their faces unnaturally wide. A chilling realization washed over him. They were all that remained of his friends. Their forms had become part of the darkness, forever trapped in this nightmare, their faces twisted with terror and anguish, silently screaming for help that would never come. Terror threatened to swallow him whole, but James had to move. As he turned to run, the ground beneath him shifted, throwing him off balance. Roots rose up, as if the forest itself sought to claim him. Panic surged through him as he stumbled, falling hard against the damp earth. The air thickened, pressing against him like a weight he couldn't shake. Heart racing, he pushed himself up, but a chilling figure stood before him, blocking his path. It was the creature, now fully formed, a grotesque amalgamation of shadows and nightmare. Its eyes glowed a sickly green, reflecting a hunger that was palpable. As it stepped closer, James could see layers of skin rotting away, exposing raw muscle and sinew beneath. "Join us," it hissed, its voice a twisted echo of his own, reverberating deep in his mind. The words crawled over his skin, and he could feel the darkness beckoning him, inviting him to become one with it. Desperation clawed at him as he felt warmth growing, the remnants of joy and hope fading under the weight of despair. The creature's limbs stretched unnaturally long, fingers clawing at the air, ready to snatch him away. With the last of his strength, he sprinted past it, barely avoiding its reach. The mist thickened around him, swirling and gripping him like hands trying to drag him back into the darkness. As he pushed through the underbrush, each step grew heavier, as if the forest itself were trying to pull him backward. He burst through the trees, his breath coming in ragged gasps as he neared the edge of the clearing. But there, at the boundary between light and shadow, stood another figure. This one was familiar. It was Sarah, a dark silhouette against the mist, her eyes wide with a mix of relief and horror. But as he drew closer, the shape twisted, distorting into something monstrous. "You should have joined us," it croaked, voice warped and contorted, the familiarity slipping away like smoke. Now you're like them. The realization hit him like a blow. The clearing was a trap, an illusion to draw him in and keep him forever. Panic surged again, and with one last burst of energy, he raced past this spectral form. The shadows clawed at him, clawing at his mind, whispering doubts that threatened to overwhelm him. "You can't escape," they hissed in a chorus, echoing around him. But he refused to listen, fought against the madness that threatened to consume him. The forest screamed with frustration as he barreled through the last of the trees and stumbled into the open. But the relief was short-lived. Here stood the vast darkness of the forest, but the familiar warmth had vanished, replaced instead by an overpowering sense of dread that encased him. It was a new kind of fear, a palpable sense of being watched, as if the trees themselves held breath. The air was cold and stale, thick with the stench of decay. He looked back to where he had come, frantically searching the edges of the darkness, praying to see something familiar. But the space was empty now, just a gaping maw of shadows yawning before him, ready to consume him whole. James felt the shadows reaching, stretching out, eager to pull him back into their embrace. Despair flooded him as he realized he hadn't escaped. He had only delayed the inevitable. He turned to run again, heart in his throat, each footfall echoing like a death knell against the hollowed ground. The deeper he ran, the more the whispers returned, creeping back into his head, filling him with a chilling sense of hopelessness. His legs felt heavy, each step becoming more difficult, as if the forest was trying to pull him back into its depths. He stumbled forward, when suddenly the ground gave way beneath him, and he fell down into the darkness, screaming, but the sound was swallowed by the overwhelming void. All around, darkness writhed like a living thing. As he fell, he realized he was surrounded, encased in shadows, with nothing but emptiness ahead. A voice like molasses seeped into his thoughts. "Welcome home," it purred, and James understood. This was what lay at the heart of the darkness. The ultimate truth, the horror that devoured hope and light. He was one of them now, forever lost, his cries lost among the shadows, left to wander in an endless night.